May 17th, study session for the Salina City Commission. I know we've got a lot to cover. Do you want to wait a couple minutes for Commissioner Ryan, or should we just dive right in and let him catch up when he gets?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know his whereabouts.
Okay.
So I might just start. And
Let's go ahead and do that. All right. So I will turn it over to, I will go ahead and turn it over to you or to Lauren.
Yes, I'll quickly turn it over to Lauren Driscoll, Director of Community Development Services, Marty Sugar with RDG. This is the 4th installment, I believe, of Housing Study Conversation with RDG. So Lauren, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Commissioners. Excited to have Marty here in person. We're going to go over, this is really our last study session style meeting. We're going to go over what we're proposing as the framework for the policy. And then our anticipation is Marty will be back in 4 weeks or an item will be on for action. And that would be the draft policy along with what we intend to be an addendum to the Live Salina plan. So we're not getting rid of the 2016 one, but we will have a 2021 addendum that goes in the back. So those are the deliverables that we would anticipate in 4 weeks. But today, it's getting that framework, making sure we're all on the same page so we can go forth and create those deliverables. Marty and I were just kind of talking over lunch and thought it worth sharing this anecdote. I promise I already checked with Eric and Mitch to see if they had punked me, but Dean and I were walking in the building the other day and this guy's working on one of the construction crews out in the parking lot. And he says, excuse me. Yeah. I really kind of like this town. We've been doing some work here. Where would I get a house? Where do I start? I think we're going to rent. So the Dean's looking at me. He's like, of all the people walking in this building right now, okay. And I kind of, well, can you tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for? He's like, well, we're doing some construction here. I live in McPherson. My wife's ready to have a baby. We just really like your town. Do you have any recommendations on neighborhood? Maybe who we'd start to talk to about housing? That's how real this is, though, that we have invested in quality of life things and they are showing up. Streetscape may not seem, when we look at the bills and we look at the politics of getting through that, but it's there and everybody sees it and they can feel that quality of life. And that's what makes people ask somebody in a parking lot at 8 o'clock in the morning, I really like it here. How do I get a house? And I just want to share that with you because 1, it's just so crazy random. And 2, that is what all this is about. These conversations with Marty and updating this plan and asking ourselves, how do we invest in this? Because we have people who want to come here. We want to make sure we've got a spot for them. So with that, I'm going to give you over to Marty Schuker. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Lauren. I can't tell you how nice it is to be here in person rather than on a computer. It's great. It would be nice without these, but that's how it goes right now.
Closer.
Things are getting better, but in any case, it's really good to be here, and we're really excited to present the 4th in this series of times together. I did have a chance to view the strategic planning workshop, which was incredibly helpful and a very thoughtful and complete conversation. So I was sitting there working on this and listening, not to music, but to the workshop, which was very, very helpful. So I appreciate that and all the comments and thoughts and so forth. So what we're going to do today is to present the strategy, the directions that we think that can help get us to where we ultimately want to go, which is number 1, which really can be boiled down into 2 specific areas. Number 1 is how do we meet the demand for housing in Salina, and number 2, how do we strengthen neighborhoods in Salina? They're really 2 dimensions of the same overall problem. And it is no accident that housing and community development are often related to one another. And in Salina, that has been particularly crystallized by the old greenfield versus infill argument. The ultimate goal is to have productive markets in both of those. So that's what we'll be talking about today with as you can see from your packets, a lot of examples and different ideas to move forward in. So if we could have the next slide. Thank you. So we are suggesting essentially a three-phase strategy that will take us both in the immediate term and then well into the future. And it's kind of an odd strategy because in a way it begins at the edge and works in. When we were talking this morning with people from the Salina Choto, usually you think about an organization doing very small projects and then expanding to larger ones. In a certain sense, a strategy for something like the Choto for a nonprofit community development organization is to begin with something relatively big that's credibility and finance building, and then proceed downward to the individual, to the much more difficult problem of true neighborhood development, and that in Salina is almost somewhat harder than getting new stuff built. So you'll see that kind of a almost inverted triangle reflected in this strategy. So here you see what I think are the three big elements of the strategy. We have an immediate problem, and the immediate problem is to accommodate our demonstrated and increasingly critical need for new housing, to accommodate new employees and to satisfy build-up demand that's taken place in our market over the last 10 years. But at the same time, build the capacity to look at the longer term elements, and that is, how do we revitalize neighborhoods? How do we get infill moving on an effective basis? How do we build a market that works effectively in all parts of the city? So our immediate task are those two things. Number one, the immediate problem of evaluating RHIDs and other development applications and meeting the need for housing, much of which is going to take place on adjacent sites on the I wouldn't say the edge of the city, but in newer areas, while at the same time building the capacity to start taking on the key problem and the key opportunity of revitalizing neighborhoods in the what we'll call the established city. As we move into the medium term, our task then becomes focusing much more on home ownership than on rental production. Rental production, particularly in the realm of new employees, is going to be the immediate term problem, and a good deal of the focus in our presentation this afternoon is going to be on those issues. Why? Because generally new recruits are not going to buy houses immediately or at least new employees aren't, that they're going to look for a place to transition, to check things out, to bring their families in and get settled. Eventually, they will become more and more vetted in the community and will ultimately transition into ownership. And that isn't to say that we don't look significantly at ownership housing in the immediate term, but there'll eventually be more of a transition as we as the I wouldn't say onslaught, but influx of new jobs are accommodated in town, and people then want to build equity in the community. In the medium term, we also are suggesting what we call a neighborhood fortification strategy. Fortification being to establish the strength and credibility, forte being based on the Latin word for strength, of course, to increase the ultimate success of infill development within established neighborhoods. Our long-term objective then becomes building reinvestment within the city center, not just in the public or the nonprofit market, but in the private market, to create a self-sustaining market, and then to continue to provide assistance where we need to do it at the margins. But as we build credibility and strength, the need for subsidy dollars will tend to decrease project by project, and the ability to accomplish more good with fewer dollars will also increase. So that's kind of the overall long-term strategy. A threefold strategy that first of all starts out with getting the housing that we need to have built immediately built, which focuses very much on housing policy and the issue of how do you evaluate proposals, as well as creating the organizational infrastructure to move forward into the into neighborhoods and into neighborhood projects. In the medium term, to help the employees who are moving into town become homeowners, to accommodate our existing markets as well, and to begin the process strategically of fortifying our neighborhoods. And then finally, in the long term, to do those things that we need to do to realize a self-sustaining market in all parts of the city. So next slide. You'll see 3 slides here that really kind of deal with the same thing. So to summarize, now provide housing for our expected growth. In the medium term, to provide a effective structure that fills gaps on a continuing basis and eases the transition to homeownership and equity in the community. In the long term, to have a stable and self-sustaining housing market throughout the city. The techniques or directions that we then suggest for each one of those is that in the now phase, in the immediate phase, to develop a system that evaluates applications. And so that's something that we'll be presenting to you today, or explaining what you've already seen. To do a demonstration development, probably, well, through the CHODO, that can show some directions in the market, particularly a focus on things that are not currently being built, to develop the organizational infrastructure and financing structure to help us reach phase 2, where we can begin to make the reinvestments that are necessary in the established parts of the city. And understanding that we're probably going to have a real focus on rental development, which is where the biggest deficit appears to be right now. But eventually that's going to shift to affordable home ownership in our medium phases. In our medium phase, from a program point of view, we will be putting the infrastructure that we have developed in the initial phase into operation to complete projects, to expand private involvement in new markets, and to shift our emphasis to owner occupancy, and hopefully leading logically to a third long-term perspective where we have self-sustaining markets in both greenfield and infill areas, as well as a significant level of neighborhood reinvestment. So you can see that, as we often say in neighborhood development, neighborhoods did not change and in some cases decline or experience disinvestment overnight. It happened over time. And the process of revitalization and reinvestment is also a slow one, and one that should be done in both an effective way and in a sensitive way in terms of recognizing the needs and perspectives of the people who are in neighborhoods. Another interesting thing about demographically about existing neighborhoods is that existing neighborhoods tend to be aging. And there will be ownership transitions taking place. And it's important in order to preserve housing stock that we're on the right side of those ownership transitions, that they wind up going through a program that preserves and improves and upgrades that housing stock as our affordable supply. And that is another very important place where the organizational and financial structure of a housing partnership led by Chodo comes into play. So next slide. So in terms of where we go from a policy point of view in these three phases, and again, I apologize because I was thinking this through as I was writing it at the same time, and apologize. I apologize if there's repetition here, but number one, in the immediate term, to establish an evaluation structure that responds to your perceptions of the important factors that we need to encourage in the structure and to evaluate programs effectively and objectively, to develop what we've called a quick win project, a demonstration that we have high level of confidence will succeed, but involves a new demonstration and some transformation of expectations. Also to involve employers, which will be an important thing, and to begin the process of developing the organizational and financial infrastructure that we need to move forward. In the 3 to 8 year period, to prove that new products work, to implement the financial structure, the development infrastructure, and begin to fill those gaps in the market, and to do interesting and strategic projects that strengthen our neighborhoods in an 8 year period and beyond, to achieve a self-sustaining housing market and to be able to address both infill and new greenfield development needs, and very importantly, to recognize that those are going to happen at both ends of the scale. So next slide, let's talk first of all about the now, the immediate term. So when we look at each of these elements, here we have taken the program objectives, the program criteria, and just included some comments based on each one of these. So when we think about the new workforce and the immediate demand, the issues that we have now in terms of very low rental supply and so forth, our focus is to focus now on evaluation of rental projects, to create an evaluation structure, to use those programs that we now have access to, which are essentially RHIDs, the NRP, the IRBs, fee structures, and other kinds of things that we have within our control now, and to provide a financing and evaluation structure that will meet the city's objectives. To quick win project by finding and developing with a mixture of housing densities and products, a demonstration project that can indicate how a comprehensively planned program can meet a variety of different needs, to involve our employers in who have a significant interest in employee recruitment and retention, and finally to begin the organizational process. So next slide. This chart shows the list of priorities for evaluation that you worked out at the retreat. So this was very helpful in terms of how we put together an idea for an evaluation structure. So top priority by far was get it done, was rate of development. Significant second place finisher was don't ask for front end money, pay as you go. And then other various factors got somewhat lower ratings. What this said to us is in terms of translating this into a priority setting and evaluation structure, was if you can't build it soon and you're expecting a big front end subsidy from us, forget it. Don't those are going to be deal killers as far as qualifying for further consideration goes. The other things become sort of discretionary factors. So not any one project will be perfect, but projects that accomplish that meet the first 2 or 3 criteria and then are able to move forward are then evaluated in terms of variables. How much assistance, how long does the assistance run? So it really becomes something of a 2-step process. And that idea really came very strongly out of the retreat, and at least my interpretation of what I was hearing over the computer. And I think it's a solid approach. So the scheme that we will show you is an idea. You might take a few days or a week or so to evaluate whether there's something missing or something that ought to be included, that might be a priority that isn't reflected there. But I think that as a framework, it becomes a very sound way to evaluate these projects. So before we go into that, any questions or comments so far? Well, I stop for breath so I can breathe through this thing. Yeah. Yes.
Mark, you were
Mr.
referring
Davis.
to the capacity that will support infill development. Can you expand on what that capacity includes?
Yeah, we will need, it's a very good question. We will need to build what I call an organizational infrastructure. We've got the beginning of that with the Chodo. We will need a predictable method of financially supporting those projects, particularly in this very critical medium-term range. So in the next couple of years, that's not something that can happen overnight. It's not as quick as approving a development application. So that involves a couple of different things. Number one is creating a Chodo that has sustainable capacity. So right now, there is a very, very able and capable interim director who is basically who's a great guy, but as he's been and would be a wonderful permanent director, but that's not within his long-term plans. So there is the immediate issue of how do you organize and staff such an organization. That's going to require some funding until it becomes self-sustaining. So it takes some front end work to get that done and to build that expertise. Because right now the Chodo is really much more a volunteer body than in a way than it is a development capability.
Marty,
Yes.
do we have somewhere in here where we'll discuss funding the Chodo
Yes.
and those type here in the, okay.
Yep, coming.
Get
Yep,
ahead of ourselves.
that will come. Now, there's a lot of stuff in here,
Yeah.
but number 2 will be capitalization. So the Chodo has got to have a source of money to put into projects. And again, that is not money that should be seen as charitable contributions, but it's working capital that has to be built up, which then helps to provide the kind of basic equity that's needed to move forward. That program then becomes very much focused on the established city, and so again, because we can't go from 0 to 60 right away. It's really the neighborhood improvement capacity that takes a little bit longer to develop and to implement.
Given the expressed concern about pay as you go, how does that work with the Chodo? I mean, do you think that there's infrastructure money out there from the federal government that could be requested and used to fund the Chodo? I'm wondering, I'm seeing the biggest obstacle for our well-staffed Chodo is they need money.
Yeah,
So where's the
it's
money?
going to take a community effort. And successful Chodos or CDCs really get going as a result of not necessarily public funding, but public-private funding of getting them going. So if we think about the ability of the private and public sectors in the city of Salina to organize and I'm talking about major industries, employers, lending institutions, charitable contributions, and so forth. That's kind of where that goes. Obviously, staff is not staff expenditures, especially in the front end, are not going to be recoverable through anything like sale of houses. And without knowing exactly what will happen with infrastructure, I don't think you can really depend on that either. It's going to be community related.
I have one more question that moves away from that. When you mention prove efficacy of new products, are you talking about housing styles there
Yes,
or financing methods or, yeah, so
Yeah,
it's what the
really
public will
more-
accept
really
in the
more
way of
new-
differentiated housing?
Yeah, it's really more new types of housing markets for, as we've talked about before, that people would love a 10,000 square foot lot and pay $150,000 for a house, but it's not going to happen in this or probably any foreseeable future market. So one of the interesting points will be, think about an initial Chodo project in the immediate term as being an experiment, as having a number of different kinds of products that we know can work and have demonstrated markets in other areas, but not necessarily in Salina, and demonstrate the effectiveness of those kinds of housing types. So yes, we're not really talking about financial products so much, although in a lot of cases a financing consortium can move into insuring loans or blended mortgages, but it's really much more different types of housing, different types of ownership, different sort of regimes like that. Thank you.
So do you see the Chodo as being really the driver for infill development, or are there
Initially.
other? So you don't see, like, are there other options, I guess I'm asking, in terms of, getting developers or getting groups
Yeah.
to look at infill development?
Absolutely. And I think that the Chodo will, being a nonprofit that does not have to generate capital other than to support itself, it will be the pioneer. It doesn't mean that that a development proposal or development idea from private developer isn't considered. And in fact, the financing consortium that we're going to suggest will have probably its strongest relationship to the Chodo, at least initially, but also will have the ability to finance in different ways private development. That's one of the virtues of local control, that it's not federally funded, it's not a block grant program. It has the ability to move in different directions depending upon the opportunities that present themselves. And really, when we come to established neighborhoods, private reinvestment is the last thing we want to discourage. We really want to make that happen. And ultimately, the idea of ongoing development should increasingly transfer from a nonprofit to the regular for-profit market.
Gotcha.
We
Yes,
are in a
Lauren.
study session. so
Yeah,
This is-
absolutely.
no,
Sorry,
please.
I didn't see you waving over there.
No, it's
Sorry.
Yeah.
But what I would add too is we have seen where it
Sorry.
depends on the state you're in. Sometimes they're CHOTO, sometimes they're CDCs. HUD uses those names fairly interchangeably. We have a CHOTO, Community Housing Development
Right,
Organization, but any type of nonprofit who wants to do something like this, sometimes they're just the entity that's running some of the infill programs too. Sometimes it's not always the best to have that running through the city as a program, is that you could build that capacity and maybe they do a flipping program. And maybe they do a grant that does roofs, windows, and HVAC, and maybe they do a program that does this. So for us, as we go through this, maybe that's something we look at is those types of programs. We'll tell you too, just because we're talking CHOTO, is one of the reasons Gary and Andy are here is Marty spent the morning with the CHOTO. They've hired him as a consultant to help look at potentially doing a demonstration project with the goal of creating enough revenue to be able to do infill development. And so that is definitely part of trying to kind of work through that long-term vision and trying to find some of that funding besides just a flat out public source or some of that flat out capital we've seen come from other places.
Gotcha. And just a couple of things real quick, because I know we've got a lot of material to go through, but talking about infill development, a lot of times, I mean, one of the things that we listed on our evaluation policy or priorities is scale. And obviously, you're not going to get the same kind of scale if someone's able to do a small development of
Right.
duplexes or townhomes or a small apartment building as you are in a greenfield. So, you know, I understand that from the point list, there's different points given to infill development, et cetera, but how do we make smaller developers aware that there are programs like the RHID that don't necessarily need to just be used on something that produces 100 units, but could be used for land acquisition within the core to get started on a project like that?
Yeah, that's why scale is not, well, it is in the short term kind of a
Right.
key qualifier because you've got that immediate problem of trying to produce a fairly
Volume.
large amount of housing. Generally, the RHIDs don't adapt very well to very small projects because of all the work, including a development plan and state approvals and so forth, that all the hoops you have to go through to get to that point. So at least in the short term, our thinking is that they're probably, and I think this is a practical matter, just in terms of how those projects go together, the 50 units is kind of a minimum size project. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't change that. So over time, when the need for volume is not so critical, and you might want to encourage smaller projects or a different scale, that can be changed. But right now, our recommendation, at least, recommendation for your consideration, is that size is probably a pretty important factor right now. And then, we have an opportunity as we move down the line and the immediate priorities are met to be a little bit more surgical and a little bit more able to consider smaller deals. That's why it's, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's sort of, the whole thing is sort of like an upside down triangle that in the short term, we're trying to produce as much as we can. And then as we get later on down the process, we start to get a lot more focused on individual or small type projects.
Well, I think we've talked a little bit too about, we're going to have to, over the long term, kind of keep revisiting this. And Marty's kind of taken
That's right.
what we talked about as kind of 2 5-year windows. And now we're looking at 3 sets of
Right.
3-year windows. And maybe, and I've been trying to kind of figure out is, do we do this annually or biannually? Maybe every 3 years, we just take the housing policy up, double check our numbers, see where we're at, and see is it time to maybe adjust that. And this kind of sets a nice duration to go, okay, we're really supposed to be, we should have gotten the bulk of our numbers. Now we're trying to kind of find, make this a more finite picture. We're supposed to be doing more into infill. Then, maybe our incentives change a little where we're prioritizing rather than, scale or speed. It's maybe location.
And I think that also gives you an opportunity to address a concern that was raised earlier about, are we setting a long-term precedent? We're kind of breaking this into time segments and priorities, and as we accomplish that initial goal, we reassess and reset.
And if that's something important, you guys, we can literally write that into the policy. This
Right.
policy shall be revisited every 3 years for you to take that action.
Yeah,
think that's appropriate.
this is sort of an ugly analogy, but the immediate term is sort of like being in first gear. Then the medium term is sort of like being in second gear, that the car is rolling and it doesn't, the effort changes. It's still pretty significant. And then the longer term policy is being in third gear. Things are rolling and it doesn't take too much gas to speed it up. So, like any other sort of stupid analogy, it's an oversimplification, but that's kind of the general philosophy here.
Thank you.
So what do we do in the short term? Well, this is the idea in this decision tree, as I mentioned, is to say there are certain qualifiers that are kind of non-negotiable that you have to meet to move forward. And then once we get to that level, then there are a variety of criteria that we kind of evaluate on a yes or no basis. And the variable there becomes, number one, does the project meet enough of those to warrant funding? And number two, we give a longer term, that is a greater subsidy, if the project meets more of the criteria that we find desirable. And so I submitted an application, and there's a first level of evaluation with 4 points, at least in this framework. Number one is that the project has to be online within 3 years. Otherwise, it doesn't do us any good in a 3-year time period. Number two, the front-end financing must be privately placed or arranged so that the developer is not asking for money upfront from the city. Number three, that and this was a consideration that was mentioned at the retreat, that the project fits within an acceptable profit limit, that as the numbers are evaluated, the developers are entitled to profit, but not necessarily an excessive profit. And how we evaluate that is kind of an interesting problem, but we're talking at this level about conceptual things and not necessarily about the details. And number four, that we want a project that will generate a significant scale of development. So we're using 50 units. As we had a discussion over this too, decided probably 50 is a good number in terms of being substantial enough to make a difference. If the project does not meet those 4 criteria, then it's disqualified. It isn't considered further. If it does, then we evaluate what the occupancy type is, ownership and rental. If it's an ownership project, where we're suggesting here for discussion that the requirement should be for ownership projects a median projected price of units at $275,000 or below. Now, keep in mind that the median means 50% or above that and 50% or below that. So, and we use median rather than mean or an absolute number deliberately, because we do, number one, want to encourage mixed price points in a development rather than a sort of monoculture of one price. And number two, it does give the builder and developer a good deal of variation. So so there's the possibility even of cross subsidization of building higher end houses and more affordable houses, and not and making sure that we get the numbers right. We're less worried about the price point at the top than we are about providing an affordable supply at the lower level. For rental development, it's the same sort of thing. A median gross rent here that we have projected based on our first analysis and in our first workshop of $1.25 a square foot. So again, this is not necessarily saying $800 or $1,000 or $1,500, but it's based on the size of the unit.
So, and then this chart, just to kind of bring this stuff back to the conversations we've had, we talked at strategic planning. We did kind of that dot exercise to kind of bring those things to the top. And we also, one of the things that you said was base it on these numbers that Marty's come up with. Use that as that kind of base criteria. So we know how many units we need to have of the different categories. And then we've looked at those median price points, knowing where in the market we need those. So it's using that data plus those things that you highlighted that you wanted to push forward. And this is just a really great picture of how we start to use that information to start to make decisions and how we create a policy in which we follow. And this is all up for grabs. Hence why we don't have a draft policy. This is an opportunity for you guys to say, "Oh, that's not exactly how we intended it," or "Now that I see it put like that, or it would mean this, I'm seeing it differently."
Right. Okay. So now when we go into and we're going to test this against a couple of specific proposals, but now when we go into the next step, which is looking at criteria that are that many of which were articulated by the commission, the commission members at the retreat, and others are things that I sort of dreamed up or think are important, that give us the opportunity of establishing points and weighting. So that gets into the issue that was discussed at the retreat of how do we weight the size, how do we deal with the size of the unit versus the density of it? Which of those things is more important? Well, this gives us the opportunity to say we can deal with both of those at somewhat different levels, and I think helps us objectify the criteria to a greater degree. So just to go through these quickly, if an ownership project is located in an NRP eligible area or it should be or an NHIA eligible area. This is this new program that basically says that pretty much everything in established neighborhoods, and most established neighborhoods.
It's being proposed by the feds right now, and it basically looks at the gap analysis for financing between existing housing stock and construction needed to renovate said housing stock. And the NHIA would help pay for the difference in that gap.
Yeah. And it's the area that has been calculated to be eligible with that. It's a little bit larger than the NRP area.
We have that map later.
Yeah, we have that map later in the presentation. Or another criteria. So that would be basically encouraging infill. So that might get double. That's another variable, so we can decide how many points to give each one of those things. That it produces a property value per acre of over $1 million. So that would be like if you have an acre of $1 million per acre. So if you have 4 houses that are $250,000 houses, that would qualify. If you have one house on an acre lot that generates $600,000 of valuation, that would not qualify. And that's kind of the issue here is that often things that look like they're really good deals in terms of yield aren't, that because from the perspective of density of value, a giant house on a 2-acre lot is not as good a revenue generator as 4 smaller houses, or 8 smaller houses on that 2 or whatever units on that 2-acre lot. So
Just as
So
a
this the way-
point, just as a point of reference, Lauren, what do we usually get on an acre now? Is it 3 homes? If you're looking at the River Trail area that,
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty common. It kind of depends on the developer and what style house they're doing, but I would say that's pretty typical for workforce housing or median income.
yeah. Gross density above 4 DUs per acre. And this is interesting because it helps to define gross and net density. So gross density means, gross density includes streets and parks and other spaces. So if I develop a subdivision on 80 acres and I develop 320 units on that 80 acres as an example, that would meet this criterion. Keep in mind, that means that the net density, that is the density of residential property when you take the streets and everything else out, is going to be something like 5 to 5.5 units per acre, which is going to equate to something more like a 7,000 square foot lot in a typical residential subdivision. So again, these are they sound similar, but one of them is encouraging higher yield value on an acre of real estate. The other looks at gross density and moves a project more toward smaller lots or toward attached or other kinds of housing that will generate that. Not that it disqualifies anything else, but in this kind of a system, it doesn't get the points that would be awarded for complying with that.
And you would be including the land costs in the value of that house.
Yeah, yes, correct. Yeah. Does it provide a new to market product, something that isn't usually built? So these might be attached units, townhomes, row houses, condominiums. Condominium is a weird term because it gets defined differently in different places, but we will have a specific definition for what that means. Is infrastructure available as opposed to having to be built new? Is there something unusual or interesting about the design quality or innovative about the design? That's a question that we would put to the proposer. What's cool or different or unusual about your design, and then evaluate whether it's unusual enough to warrant the point. Points if 50% or more of the units are priced below $225,000. If the project is not using available infrastructure, is it building pioneer infrastructure that is a new extension that is useful to us in terms of backfilling? So in some cases, it might make sense to use an RHID to build a piece of sewer that on a non-contiguous development because it's going to be backfilled and is something that would have been a good investment anyway. Are there features in it that are walkable or bikeable? Does the project include rehabilitation or reuse of existing structures? So here we're encouraging a project that might involve an adaptive reuse or an aggregation of and rehabilitation of a group of houses. Is it infill rather than greenfield? Again, it's not disqualifying greenfield projects, but there's an incentive for infill. Is it proximate to parks and urban services? So example would be, is it along a trail or adjacent or near a school, within walking distance of a school, near a recreational facility and so forth? That's actually the next one. Access to parks, trails, or other public use amenities. Does it mix densities? Does it mix housing types, including and incorporating rentals? So these are ideas that, and they may be, they're open to questions. So we would recommend to you that you take a look at them, see if there's anything missing or a number that seems screwy or modification to be made. I think that the overall framework is pretty good, but the weighting and the actual wording and so forth of the criteria could change. And again, a lot of these are related to what I read both from the mayor's comments and thoughts, which I really appreciate, and also from the proceedings of the retreat.
Marty, is this something that you'd like us to get back to you on? if-
Yeah, very much so.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
if
So I'm
you
just trying to
took a
think of
week or something on it, that would be
Do a
fine.
week If we're trying
Yeah.
to come back in
Yeah.
4 weeks.
Yeah.
With an
Yeah.
actual deliverable.
Right, and I'm gonna keep a list here, but if you're keeping a list of what the specific feedback that you'd like to receive from us, I would appreciate some,
Yeah.
confirming that with someone else.
I had a couple questions real quick on the gross density. In order to accomplish that, is it possible to have some, variances to our current building standards? We have it currently, I mean, in order to reach that, when you kind of look at row housing and stuff, I think of that. And so is that something where, I guess, as a governing body, we have to be willing to do in
Well,
some cases?
We can always double check, but I mean, in all reality, our setbacks and our lot densities and stuff are pretty accepting
Pretty
of these kinds of
good,
things.
yeah.
We just
Okay.
don't see them very often because
Okay.
it's not the product we typically build, but we've had people come in with concepts, right, through DRT or other things, and almost, I'd say 90% of the time we can accommodate it.
Okay.
So I don't foresee that being our.
Okay.
big
I mean,
thing.
that's a question, that one. And then the next one,
If I may, I think it may be more of an issue in existing neighborhoods where
Yeah.
if you
Mhm.
want to try a new innovative
Mhm.
product in an established neighborhood or adjoining an established neighborhood, and traditionally that meets with a lot of opposition and there's an expectation of just replicating what's already on the ground.
Mhm.
North Salina has a lot of substandard lot sizes and a
Right.
lot of varied lot sizes.
Right.
So it's really hard if you're trying to parcel them together. We may need to do a little replatting and things like that, but
the other thing, when you said available infrastructure, is that available infrastructure up to the
to
development,
the-
not
up to
in
the
the development?
development,
Okay, that's.
Yeah, so it doesn't require an interceptor, or it
Right.
just requires a local extension. Right, exactly.
Okay.
well, and you'll kind of see in the scoring or the weighting,
Mhm.
I think one of the things Marty and I both took away from the strategic planning was a priority for infill, but trying to find that balance between meeting demand. So this still, I think, is trying to weight that. If somebody's got that idea, cool, you're going to come to the top of the pile and getting that in there, but not necessarily saying no to some of the other things.
Right, and I guess I just, I have a little bit of concern about the 50 or more units or lots, because if we're talking about adaptive reuse, and I'm thinking specifically about the Lowell School development, I mean, that wouldn't meet this threshold, I don't believe, of 50 or more units, or even, like, I don't remember how many were in phase one of the Lee lofts, but some of those things, if we're just gonna be like, nope, you've got 35 or you've got 40, and that's a hard stop. We're not even going to
Yeah, and
look at
interest-
it. I think that might something, if we're then coming down here and, weighting includes rehabilitation and reuse of existing structures, we might need to be flexible
Or
a little
weight
bit.
that
I mean,
higher.
what's that?
Maybe we weight that higher. If
Or-
it's a reuse
or-
of an existing structure, maybe it's 3.
Or
something
you
like
use a
that.
different threshold for
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
which would probably be the easiest. That's a very, in fact, I think
Yeah,
that's a
or
very good
either
idea.
set the number just a little bit lower. I mean, I'm not saying if
Yeah.
somebody comes to you with 4 units, it's the full court press and you're going to give it what you would to something that's got 100. But if it's an adaptive reuse of a building in the community, I'd like to see us err on the side of flexibility in case it doesn't reach that 50.
Yeah, and it was occurring to me
unit
too, that,
threshold.
that if somebody put together a deal of say 20 existing houses in North Salina and said, we're going to do a comprehensive rehabilitation of those, we definitely would not want to disqualify that
Right.
project.
Right.
So, yeah, I think having a different standard for rehab would be a
Okay.
very good idea.
Cool.
I mean, there is one thing we could look at too is, if you want kind of like a clause, like for instance, in LIHTC, the low income housing tax credit, when the state goes to score applications, they have kind of different application categories. One of them is unique projects. And those projects kind of come to the top of the list if they meet that criteria, and they generally try to fund those up to at least 2 of them. So maybe there is some kind of category that's just an utterly unique project that if
Okay.
it doesn't fit into this, but it meets kind of a core set of values or a purpose and intent that you
Right.
have that can then come in front of you.
Right. And like, I don't know where we stand on St. John's Hospital. And I mean, I don't want to go down that road, right now, but I'm just,
Yep.
that would be the example of something that whether or not it produces 40 units or 100 units, it would definitely be of value.
Well, and maybe because there is a difference between the evaluation criteria for ownership and rental, because rental is the next slide, but maybe there's two lines that it's, greenfield developments, it's 50 or more units.
Right.
Infill developments, it's
That's what,
20,
that's
something
what.
like that. They get their own line.
Yeah, that's what we're
That makes-
suggesting.
That totally
Yeah.
makes sense.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, and then the variable then becomes, you have to have a certain floor of points on this to qualify. But then the term of the RHID runs longer for a higher number of points. So it'll be interesting to kind of apply these to a couple of real world examples and to calibrate these numbers. But I think that the length of the tax allocation, which is basically what I mean here, should be dependent upon the consistency of the project with the city's objectives and frankly, the difficulty of doing that project.
Right.
So and this is an example too, when you saw the other RHID proposals or policies from other cities, some of them just had a flat out number, like always 15 or always 10.
Yeah.
Or this kind of gives some of that flexibility that you guys have been talking about based on these priorities. And we're using RHID as an example because that's what we've been talking about the most. But that final deliverable product of a policy is going to kind of encapture our overall purpose and intent in housing. And the first one in there is going to be RHID as a tool. But then as we use other tools, we're going to use these things you guys are talking about to kind of keep crafting them like we're doing with the RHID to really make sure it's working for what we intend them to do. So that's just trying to kind of put all these things together in a meaningful way so they work together and they do what we're hoping they do.
Yeah, and also to have some things that are I mean, there's some subjectivity obviously in these, but most of these criteria are things that you can say, yeah, you meet it or no, you don't. And I think that's important because I mean, the one that's arguable, I suppose, is unusual design quality. So I would have the developer say what's unusual about the project. Of which, well, it's just kind of a regular subdivision would probably not be one, but or an encouragement to do something that we can't necessarily define, but is interesting and special. It might be a public space, a placemaking feature, a street light, some other characteristic that could that could make that particular project distinctive. A good plan, a plan that's interesting. So we have a slightly different list for rental projects for consideration. And so the density is a little bit different. The affordability levels obviously change because we're talking about rental units rather than owner occupied units. So here the location in NRP eligible area stays the same. Density above 20 units per acre some of our developments have been in like the 12 or 13 units per acre, but we've had some that have gotten much higher and have gone out to the 20 unit per acre range. That here we're suggesting 50% or more of units have rents that are either below $800 a month or below $1 a square foot. 25% or more are family units with 3 or more bedrooms. This is something that's been really an acute shortage in most rental development around the country. That there's been nothing in the way of building larger units because there's sort of a presumption that people will are singles, and something from 0 to 2 bedrooms is more attractive. But in our situation, where we're attracting new employees and new families, the bigger units are going to be pretty important. Mixes, densities, and building types, these are all pretty much the same. One that we added, though, or a couple that we added, is access to urban, community, and commercial services, so that rental projects are not built without access to shopping, grocery stores, and so forth and so on. And includes a transition to ownership option. That's something we'll talk about a little bit later. But it is conceivable, and was something we talked with the Choto board about this morning, is the concept of rent to own, where units are built on a rental basis, but also have an ownership transition option. This applies largely to single family type rentals that might be built with LIHTC, where you could over time accumulate enough equity is reserved, put away in an escrow, and you accumulate enough equity to make the down payment. Right now, one of the biggest issues in terms of first-time home buyers has been lack of down payment capital. So people can afford the payments, but they don't have any assets, mostly because the college they went to took all of those assets. But the ownership transition, I'm just kidding there, but depends where you went.
The Choto,
But
does the Choto usually, because they're turning the same dollars, they usually don't own the properties. They usually rehab them
That's
and
right.
sell them.
Yeah.
So they would have to have substantially more dollars if they were going to do the
Yeah.
rent to.
Yeah, these have to be
Rent out.
supported. Well, they're getting rental income.
True,
So
but they're not getting that. Like, yeah.
So
It depends on how many
but they're not
dollars
getting the money is not revolving as
Right.
fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
So-
kind of an interesting bridge that we're starting to see, especially with housing markets being so hot. Down payments and cash have become such a big deal that even if you have the down payment, you didn't have the cash, or you've got the credit, but you don't have the down payment, and the housing prices have gotten so high, there's no way you're going to ever be able to save the down payment. So more and more communities who are trying to get kind of that long-term investment home buyer, especially in that existing housing stock, is the way you do that is that rent to own scenario. So if that's something we're seeing, and I think there's nothing wrong about promoting that up front, but in that kind of a 3-dot scenario that Marty's got, that's really definitely something that jives with dots 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Where when we start to look at infill, and we want to create neighborhood stability too, these rent to own programs have been very successful. So it would be a change for the Choto for sure, and looking at that, but I think it's one that's doable.
And I can't remember, it'd be something to check with the local lenders on. We have some of the first time home buyer money that comes through Kansas Housing Resource Corp, and then also Federal Home Loan Bank. I can't remember whether, if you're renting the property, if there's already if there's a condo, depending on how that is, if you're renting to purchase, I don't know if that still qualifies as a first time home buyer. That'd be something to check on, because
Yeah.
they'd be
do
building
have
up that
somebody-
equity. Not only would they build up that equity through rent, then if they could still qualify for the first time home buyer money would help also. So.
We do have somebody on the board who works in banking, and that didn't seem to be an issue, but that we will
Okay,
definitely
I
follow up
just
on.
Yeah.
can't remember that.
Yeah, this has been a tremendously successful program in North Omaha, actually. That through a CDC, through Holy Name Housing Corporation. And it's interesting that a number of years ago, we seemed to be doing a cluster of housing studies in Michigan, and we would recommend rent to own projects. And there's a developer who was following us around from city to city and building them. They were not building them with low-income housing tax credits like Holy Name Housing Corporation did. But then they weren't constrained to the same sort of continuous occupancy that you're limited to in LIHTC projects.
Approximately how long do you see when these projects have gone? How many years does it take from to go from rent to own?
We generally will figure about 5 years to build enough equity. If it's LIHTC, it's 50, if it's the same house, but so what Holy Name did was kind of interesting. In the same neighborhood, they would build one house that was a low-income housing tax credit house and a basically identical house in the same neighborhood. And so the family could use the equity built and buy another house that was very much like the one that they had been, quote, renting.
So do they take a percentage of that rent? They take a percentage of that rent and apply it to the,
The purchase, right, exactly, that it gets escrowed and it goes into an account that, that can be used to buy another house.
interesting concept.
Yeah.
I hate to see the wet blanket order halfway through our time. and we don't get where we're supposed to have them start. It's a lot.
Marty's gonna have to talk faster. We're gonna have to
No,
quit
well,
asking
we'll
questions,
speed
one
up.
of the two.
When we get to the pictures, we'll speed up. Yeah, by 4 o'clock, I'll suffocate on the mask anyway. It gets really wet in here, by the way, when you're talking. Yeah, this one is going into the washer right away. The one program that I did want to talk about a little bit has been problematical, not just here, but in a lot of places that is an available program is the NRP, the Neighborhood Revitalization Program. And, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about why doesn't this program get used more and how do we restructure it in a way? So it is, in theory, the NRP is a really good program. So it provides an incentive for making improvements to a home. It's relatively simple to do. It applies to project. There's no floor in terms of it being a small project, but it has one critical problem, and that is it's one of those incentives where you have to take away and then give it back. So in other words, if I say I live in North Salina and I decide to improve my kitchen, and I spend $20,000 on a kitchen improvement project, and I don't know how the assessor here operates, but if they're like assessors in most places, they're not going to increase that assessment on the house. They might a little bit if they know about it, but generally in a neighborhood with low housing values, they're not going to do that. Therefore, there's really no taxes to abate. There's no tax basis to abate. If they do make the reassessment and assess my house at $20,000 more, I get the added taxes back. But if they didn't reassess in the first place, I wouldn't have had to pay more in the first. I wouldn't be paying taxes to have to get the thing back, get the money back. And so people just don't see it as being, in general, to be a very effective.
Where I see it being
technique.
effective is when you have a significantly dilapidated property that you take from 20 to 80,000 or
right.
whatever. And I think I called Lauren on this the other day. We have a couple in town that started buying up properties, and so I sent them our NRP program, and I was surprised. I guess I hadn't looked at it in a while. There's a lot of neighborhoods I would have thought would fall into that don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know a couple homes they had bought that they had done exactly what we talked about. They'd taken them from 20 to $60,000, $80,000, taking properties that, were close to needing to be torn down, but they didn't qualify because of the locations.
Yeah. So the point is that we have to rethink. It's a perfectly good idea. We've got to think about the reasons why it's not working and restructure that, figure out how to make it work more effectively. And that is something that we will include in the housing policy. And hopefully it will work. There also have to be criteria for NRPU. So if you're, if you're, say, you're buying up a bunch of houses and you're doing kind of minor repair work to make them habitable again, and the value goes up, that's probably not the kind of, action that we're trying to create an incentive for. So they're, so we're going to be taking a little bit more, we need to be taking a little bit closer look at that, but that program is not here and in many places really living up to its potential.
Well, I think what Marty's trying to say with that last point is there's a big difference between getting one of those houses, putting a couple new windows in and painting the front door and calling it good,
Right.
to like foundation repairs were done, new roof is on, the things that it takes to really bring a house back to what is quality housing stock. And in, where do you incentivize? This is what's getting incentivized, because that's a slight
Yeah.
margin, and if that's what you're doing, you don't really.
Does
need
our,
incentive.
does our program have a minimum like $10,000 investment, or is that my imagination?
Yeah, it's like 10,000 for
10,000.
residential, I think 20 for commercial.
Okay.
Okay, so that's to come. Next slide, please. So number 2 is the quick win demonstration. So the concept is to do something visible that's a new project that's different, not replicating what the private sector does, that will also generate some operating capital for the Chodo. So the project should be visible. It should demonstrate best practices to the degree that we can. It should build types of housing that were not necessarily they're not necessarily common in the current private market. And as I've mentioned here in the 4th point, it should really address what we call the missing middle, the stuff that we're really not building in terms of density or price point. So what do we need? Well, we need a good site with good access to services. So there are several interesting possibilities that we're looking at, and that involve, we think, available property. A developer with risk tolerance. That means that's where a nonprofit development corporation moves in. That's got community support. A means of financing, that's got to be arranged. A market-based program and development plan, that's got to be arranged. So our kind of supplemental agreement with the Chodo is to think through these issues and to put together effectively a physical development plan and a business plan to make something like this happen.
Well, and one of the reasons this got brought up is Marty came to us and said, when I look at other cities that kind of broke the log jam, we've talked about that. Mike's talked about that phrase, is particularly with rental housing, we have a log jam. And what we've been talking about for the last couple of meetings is that risk that developers have when they're looking at bringing a new product to our community. We pretty much build a certain type of single family residential and a certain type of rentals, and we haven't built those kinds of rentals in a really long time. So how do you demonstrate that other products can be built here? How do you do that? You find a developer that's willing to take some risk, but has a different motive on reward. And so when we looked at other cities that had similar issues to ours, they were using a nonprofit developer. We happen to have one established. The Chodo wanted to be proactive about that. And I mean, if we get through this meeting and city commission's like, nope, we don't see a demonstration project being necessary or something like that, I think we can address that. But to be proactive, when Marty brought this up, I said, you need to let the Chodo know, this is something you're thinking. So they're not caught off guard that at the end of a Monday meeting, they find out that they're smack in the middle of step 2.
Crowned developer.
Yeah. And in a proactive way, the board has taken the initiative to hire Marty to do a feasibility analysis, to look to see what it would take to actually do this, and is using its very meager funds to do so because it thinks it can, and that this would be valuable, and are willing to be a participant in this process. So they are aware, and hence why they're here, of their role in this, if that's what we're hoping for from them.
Yeah, so next slide is just a piece of generic land, happens to be on Ohio Street. But one thing we don't have to worry about is too much topography in Salina. So that's one constraint that isn't a big problem. Next slide, Jacob. from physical point of view, this is actually from the Broadway Boulevard study, if you recognize it. And it was a concept that was done along that street. But a diagram of what a physical development plan looks like, something that's going to give people an idea of scale and layout, and this particular project involves looking at a combination of attached and small lots detached housing. There might be a new feature. This is a drawing of a type of street that we call well, we don't, the Dutch do, called a Woonerf, that's basically a mixed traffic, mixed pedestrian car street, where cars are slowed down to pedestrian speed, and it produces shared space. Not to say that we would ever do anything like this. It's done in Holland all the time, but as an experimental kind of infrastructure. Next slide.
Well, it's a good example too, when we talk about uniqueness, right? You know, looking at a project that incorporates that much walkability or connectability would be very unique for us. And
Yeah.
so those are the kinds of things that might rise to the top of the pile.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that says that streets have to be built with curb gutter, distinct sidewalks that
Well,
we.
there's a code.
Well, there is,
Yeah,
but
that's
we're going to
part-
blow that away.
Once you've done that, you can do
Yeah.
some other streets.
Well, there is something that says that, but we can't. But these are concepts that are new to the United States, but they do work, and they can be really quite economical in terms of how they function. This is a great little demonstration project. This app is in a small town in Iowa called Macokota, and it's a pocket neighborhood called Bear River Cottages. Little homes built on a block. And next slide, please. And you can see how they're marketed. And this has been a very successful little project in this in this community. Backloaded garages and parking off the street, kind of an interior court that these are organized around, and it was done as a partnership with the Eastern Iowa Development Corporation.
Well, and these are a great example too of how we can mix new build in with infill.
That's right.
You know, these are definitely some smaller pieces. So whether you've got a larger project that you're doing this type of product mixed in with something else, or we happen to be able to get a bigger piece of property in an infill neighborhood, this is the kind of thing that could go there and really match the scale of an existing neighborhood.
A lot of our things have been kind of incentive driven and incentive focused. I mean, is that something that we need to take a look at too, in terms of a development like this? How do we adjust our codes? How can we make something like accessory dwelling units or whatever, be a possibility?
Accessory
So-
dwelling units, I know the planning commission's been talking about for a
Mhm.
couple of years, and if that's something you want Marty to put into the policy as needs to be developed, I don't think that's going to be done in 4 weeks, but if
No.
that's an amendment we need to make, I think we could rally support around that for sure. But for an example, this type of product, in general, our building codes could already address that. I
Yeah.
don't think there's dramatic changes. For instance, there was a product out of Wichita, if you've seen the articles, they're called micro mansions. We were asked to look at those to see, did they comply with our building codes, because they're a semi-prefab structure, and they did completely comply with our building codes, and that's a very small, compact home. So these cottage methods, we've also looked at cottages like this for when folks have come in about retirement communities and senior living, so we know our code could adopt to these.
Okay.
Yeah, those are very cool, by the way.
Yeah, they really exist. This is
They
not
they really
just
do
in
exist.
They're in
Yeah.
Iowa.
Yeah. Next slide. This project we've already shown you once, but these are semi-attached, single-family homes. Wonderful little project that is both contemporary. Notice all these things have porches on them. That's porches porches are actually a pretty cheap amenity to put on a house. They really do sell. Next slide. So then third item is greater employer involvement. And this too can be in different stages. The first thing that there are a couple of things that employers can really do to help production in the short term. Obviously, number one is meeting their projections for employment. That kind of, if they don't, then all bets are off. But we certainly hope that will happen. But the most significant thing in the short term is on rental projects is a commitment to rent or guarantee income on a certain number of housing units. That is something that can be done in cooperation with developers solely on the private market immediately, and can provide a good deal of surety to a developer if you know that in a rental project, 10 or 15% of your units are going to be guaranteed for occupancy. Sort of cuts the risk down and cuts the vacancy rate down, and something that employers could do in the short term. Related to that is housing counseling for new and referrals for new employees moving to town, and in thinking about something like our quick win project is participation as equity investors on individual basis in either in ongoing projects or new projects. So participation in the financing mechanism for a Chodo-driven project, for example, would be an example of that. In the long term, there's a role for employers in kind of the longer term organizational infrastructure. In the financial structure, there are cases where employers have banded together to form their own development company, their own housing development company. Whether that's necessary or not, I don't know, but it can be done. And to be an equity investor, again, not to lose money, but to return, provide a reasonable rate of return to development projects of interest to them. So next slide. We talked a little bit about St. Louis University, the projects that it has helped encourage in its formerly distressed area in St. Louis, Missouri, providing housing information and, in this case, financial incentives to people in the university community who are buying or leasing homes in the immediate neighborhood. In the longer term, next slide, in Sioux Center, Iowa, we talked about this as well. The employers formed a land development corporation, which used their collective capital to build out about 70 homes in economy of scale. So they would build 5 houses and sell those, and then recycle that money and build 5 more. Finally, in the first phase, beginning and executing the process of setting up what we've called here housing partnership, and this is something we also recommended in the 2016 plan. So the double lines and triple lines represent strength of relationship. So the housing partnership includes, in addition to the city, which obviously is going to be involved in any case, is the Chodo and any other CDCs that might be established. That's probably doubtful, but it's conceivable that a church-related organization could form a CDC and operate within a specific area. We're not necessarily in competition with each other. A finance consortium whose strongest relationship initially would be with the CDC, but not necessarily exclusively with the CDC. And then also the private development sector, either through its own actions or in partnership with the Chodo. So a private there are many situations where a private developer on something like a low-income housing tax credit will become a limited partner or that equity investors become a limited partner with the Chodo, who's the general partner in a development corporation. The Chodo is a nonprofit can't use the tax credits, but the equity investors or a private developer can. And so that kind of a relationship provides the benefits and priorities given to CHODOs in connection with low-income housing tax credit projects who have a special sort of get to the front of the line status, but can involve the private sector in these kinds of partnerships. So the organizational structure of that follows a couple of different points. From a financing point of view, it involves and welcomes capital participation by a number of agencies, lenders, and it's helpful in terms of meeting CRA requirements, private philanthropy, employers, corporations, the Economic Development Corporation, the public sector, even private individuals. We would envision it as providing a couple of different types of financial assistance, direct or leveraged financing for the CHODO or other nonprofit development corporations. So it could provide primary project financing, interim financing, or even permanent financing to a nonprofit developer. We are very much like the idea of providing interim financing for private developers on projects that we want the private sector to be involved in. The advantage here is that a financial consortium can write non-recourse loans. It can reduce the risk for the private developer because it has the capability of being more patient in terms of payback on interim financing. If the project doesn't fill up or it takes a while to market it, and the developer views that as a high-risk project. It can provide gap financing. So if there's a deficit in the rents that a project can charge versus the rents that it has to pay to make the numbers work, that gap can be filled on a subordinated debt basis. It can help develop initial capitalization for the CHODO. And we suspect that as time goes on, this consortium will focus more on infill development as it grows and matures in concert with the entire program here that we're outlining. It isn't necessary to have financing consortium provide money that can be provided by the normal private sector. We are here looking at higher risk areas, types of development that entail higher risks. The whole idea of the financing organization, in addition to capitalization, is risk abatement. It's trying to address that major disincentive to housing development. The development entity starts with the CHODO. The CHODO, and we're so happy to see that group active and reorganized because it's incredibly important. Is where this process starts. It may expand. There may be other development corporations around a neighborhood or a local base that emerge. The development entities is capable of forming partnerships with private developers. I mentioned earlier the idea of it being a general partner with limited partnership equity investors who are able to use the tax credits. It has access to LIHTC, the MIH program, Moderate Income Housing Program of the state, CD and home funds. Probably when we get to the later stages of this process and everything goes swimmingly in terms of employment growth, Salina will become a CDBG entitlement. So that's something to think about in the future as you pass the 50,000 population mark. We think that this kind of entity should focus on unusual projects, sort of show the way for the private sector to be involved. And again, we think its initial area of focus will be a relatively interesting but relatively low risk project, but it will shift to infill to that more difficult market as things develop. Okay, so number 2 is the neighborhood fortification stage. So, so yeah, next slide and then the next slide.
Real quick, Marty, before we get into this, I just want to remind the commission, I do sit on the Choto Board of Directors. We've talked about this before, but I think this is a good time that as we're talking about the Choto's involvement in the housing in Salina, that I very much recognize that if we choose to go forward in this direction and have them play this part, that I will need to pull away from the Choto Board and not be a part of that in order to have that ethical separation. But we have not had this kind of relationship up to this point. So I just want the board to be aware, remind you that I'm aware of that. And if that's the direction we go, I very much understand the importance of that.
Thank you.
So okay, great, and that's a very good point. So as we think about neighborhood fortification of strengthening neighborhoods, the concept here is to build needed projects with a demonstrated demand on infill sites, designed to build value and credibility of established neighborhoods. This is a little bit of will be a little bit of a refinement of the beachhead idea that we had in the 2016 plan. I think the problem with that was that it sort of overreached and its beachheads were a little bit too big and a little bit too, in some ways, monochromatic. So it wasn't necessarily focused on specific kinds of projects that had demonstrated demands. I think that is the key to it. And you'll see what I mean as we get into this part of the program. The housing partnership for these kinds of projects, which involve significant immersion into established parts of the city, would be the main force that advances the concept. So again, in a way, these are demonstrations of markets and demonstrations of things that are specifically needed and highly marketable. What they are, we can suggest, and we'll suggest some ideas, but in the meantime, they're not things that are being built or assembled yet. The city does have a significant role in these areas, and that is to make capital investments that support the fortification effort. And by capital investments, this doesn't necessarily mean pouring money into housing projects, but doing things like neighborhood street rehabilitation, curbs and sidewalks, lighting, those kinds of things that can have an enormous effect in terms of encouraging reinvestment by property owners. It is really a very proven to be a very effective tool in terms of addressing housing rehabilitation. It is important to create conditions for feasible private reinvestment. So these may be individual homeowners, it may be substantial developers. It might mean issues like eliminating, like improving code enforcement or eliminating blighting influences in neighborhoods that are really kind of dragging the whole area down.
Or it's those support type grant programs. You know, we've seen a lot
That's
of
right.
success in Topeka where they had a program really narrowed down: windows, roofs, and HVAC. It brought utilities down. It improved the exterior of the homes. It gave more cash in the home because they didn't literally have it going out the window or down the drain. And it improved the overall neighborhood look. I mean, those are definitely examples of fortification that if you've got people making investments, we're trying to narrow that gap. We're actually able to achieve that by also bringing up home values and bringing up quality of life.
Yeah, the important thing about those is that they're really envelope improvements that in addition to making things look better, that they stabilize the exterior of the house so that it doesn't deteriorate. Because we can't build new housing for the cost. Even we can't build new affordable housing at the cost that even a rehabilitated existing unit will get us to. That's why we really think that acquisition, rehab, resale programs that are largely Choto driven right now, although they can be less politely called home flipping, but we don't necessarily use that term, can be very effective, and really should ultimately be a significant part of this phase of the work. So here we get into to some of the types of projects that are focuses of this, that are things that we think have demonstrated impact and demand that can be real focuses for the work of the Choto, both now to some degree, but certainly in phase 2. Affordable senior housing, something that is really limited and has a really significant demand. Equity building development like the rent ownership units that we were talking about a little bit earlier, acquisition, rehab, resale, which is a very important element that the Choto is beginning to get involved in. One thing that's kind of interesting is that really needs a construction capability. So right now it's very much a do-it-yourself operation, and again, to get that up to scale is going to require some ability to form a workforce or relationships with contractors. Infill mini subdivision, so taking a block or a block face or a half block or an available site and developing a cohesive project on a smaller scale in those neighborhoods, combining housing and support services. One of the things that I think is a real opportunity for success is integrating new housing development with childcare. That childcare is a tremendously significant need, and we've talked about this both in Salina and around the country. And one thing that can be a real successful combination is combining housing development or infill development in an area with a child care facility with properly staffed. New housing forms like townhomes and auxiliary units, live-work environments, and finally adaptive reuse and historic preservation. So the city side, as we said earlier, really deals as much with infrastructure as anything. Street rehabilitation, sidewalk upgrades, streetscape lighting, placemaking, and finally making the NRP more successful. Next slide. So here's an example of this is a low-income housing tax credit funded senior project. This was done by a CDC again in Omaha, which I lived there. It's probably a place I show you more examples of than you wanted, but it's a really great little project that provides basically a community in a redevelopment area. Next slide is the Crown or rent to own program that we've talked about, and this is a description on the slide of how that works. Next slide. This is actually the site of a former, might sound a little familiar here, the site of a former hospital that was that closed and basically went into serious deterioration, was acquired by the city and was cleared and replaced by a single family owner occupied subdivision, also developed by CDC. Next slide, a block of new infill homes around a school that has a high quality childcare center in the middle of it. So this has really been a major focus for the redevelopment of the surrounding neighborhood. Next slide. redevelopment block of picking a block that has sufficient vacancy and housing deterioration, acquiring that and developing new housing along it. So we did the rendering below of the street above. It's actually in Excelsior Springs, Missouri. And a developer saw that and built it. This is actually a LIHTC project, low-income housing tax credit rental project with that you wouldn't be able to tell because it's all, again, these really lovely single-family houses. Next slide, infill townhomes, which can work well on sites. Whether they don't have to be sloped like this, but
Well, these are kind of an example of what Brian Richardson did.
yeah.
One block off of Iron.
Yeah, so the concept of attacking gaps, this is the NHIA program that we talked about earlier. So you can see the area that under the statistics is eligible for that. So it's pretty much everything north of Crawford Street. And then that little tail is along the western side of the city down to Magnolia. So it's a little bit bigger area than the NRP area is, but could be a very effective program if it gets approved in the infrastructure package
Well, and
or by itself.
it might be even worth looking at this map if we're revising the
That's
NRP to
exactly.
match this more similarly, because this is what the feds have kind of looked at and said, you're trying to get that gap in housing. Here's where it's going to happen. Here's the census tracts and the other data that came up with that map.
Yeah, it isn't wildly different, but it's
Yeah.
a little bit,
Makes
a
it
little
takes
bit
the
easier.
center. We missed
Yep.
4th Street and 8, there's some of those, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This makes a
Yeah.
lot more sense to me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but it's just expanded just enough. And I think to really
Yeah.
kind of get to that moderate level, some of the stuff that's covered in the NRA, it's what it takes to bring it up in value might not be worth somebody who maybe wants to start at a $50,000 home versus $30,000 home in that rehab category.
So, and then finally, please excuse the Google photograph, but this is in Council Bluffs, Iowa, which is a city that's really used street reconstruction very effectively to generate reinvestment in what was once not a very strong neighborhood. Okay, so finally the results, and we get to the point in phase 3 where things start to support themselves. So the method behind the madness is to build enough value and enough security that we get to the point that the private sector begins to work with either minimum or no assistance. So a couple of examples of that kind of going on. This is this little project that's a totally privately funded project in DeSoto, Kansas, near downtown, called the Cottages. It's really, I haven't been there since it's been built, but I was there doing a housing study during construction. It's really a very nice little development. Private infill development. This is the one on the right, is in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And then the next slide, very importantly, and this is kind of where the rubber hits the road, is getting to the situation where people are reinvesting in their own houses and doing rehabilitation. And at this point, the amount of individual subsidy gets rather small, and we hope that and think that the private market begins to respond and ultimately things happen. The problem with housing programs is that the need is never fully satisfied. But the best thing we can do is to get to the point where people are able to build secure wealth in their homes and see those homes as valid investments for the future. So just quickly to review, next slide, that as we said when we talked last, we thought that that an action program should build resources for both filling gaps in financial performance and in expediting the pipeline. Pipeline being not a good term to use right now in view of the colonial pipeline, but you know what I mean, of things that are lined up for development, to demonstrate a demand, that there is a demand for different housing types to engage builders in developing those through our demonstrations, to reduce risk factors, to engage industries, to diversify the products that we offer, and to have an overall strategy that ultimately conserves and rehabilitates our existing inventory of housing. So the test then becomes for us in thinking about these ideas and moving forward. What should the city's focus be? Well, I think we've probably answered that question with the three-part strategy. How should resources be used and projects evaluated? How do we balance new development and conservation needs? We're very sensitive to this and listening to the retreat proceedings and of the need to balance both markets, both our infill and established city markets and needs and our kind of a little bit easier to accomplish greenfield needs. What should a production structure look like? What kinds of resources are realistic? So hopefully we have addressed or will address these questions in both the policy and in the Salina amendment. And so our next step will be in 4 weeks to deliver the actual policy document draft to you, as well as the Salina amendment, because we're planning to be wrapped up with both of those things within that period, so that you can review those, again, modify and move forward.
Any questions for Mr. Schubert or Ms. Driscoll?
I do. In 4 weeks, we'll look at the policy. We have a couple of developments in front of us. Where do those stand between now and this? My concern is, one of the things we talked about was the rate of development. And if we wait 4 weeks and then we have to discuss those projects again, we're going to get to the point where we're going to get out far enough that we may not be getting things perhaps built in a significant time frame to meet the demand for employees coming to the community.
I don't think it was ever I don't think it was ever assumed by us that you wanted to wait
Okay,
for these,
Yeah.
for the housing policy. So
Because
we're in the
the
development.
project's already advanced to.
right.
Correct.
That's,
You
I
passed
just
the
didn't want us to be
resolution.
sitting for 4 weeks. So,
No.
okay,
No, I mean, we've
No.
sent the information to Department of Commerce.
okay.
But
Meeting this week with our
that's
bond
not
counsel.
totally correct. We don't have a way to evaluate the projects or negotiate the terms of an agreement till we have the policy. Or have
No,
some,
you totally do. I mean, if we didn't have a
Well,
policy.
so without setting a precedent every time we do it again. I thought the plan was so that we didn't have to set 27 different precedents with 27 projects that come in front of us.
Correct, you do not. I'm gonna look at Mike, but I mean, that's all on you guys. You guys get to make that choice. If the choice is we want to act now on these two that we have, and we're just gonna have to kind of tough our way through those because we don't have examples and we don't have a policy, that is definitely an option. And then going forward, if you adopt the policy that we're talking about 4 weeks from now, everything that came after that, you would look through the guise of the policy and have that type of criteria to go through.
Given
Yeah.
the criteria that you've given us today,
You
it's
could
in
do
my
it.
mind that both of the projects we have would qualify.
Yeah,
Clearly.
Yeah.
So I agree with Commissioner Hoppick that we need to move those two forward. Because I think the delay will hurt the project.
Well, and they have moved forward.
Yeah.
So as per the process through state statute, you pass the resolution. Those have gone to the Department of Commerce. They're awaiting Department of Commerce's approval. That gets us through the next two. And then the next stage would be the development agreement negotiation. So we are beginning to set up the timeline and the process for that. And following the, Commerce and a development agreement being pulled together along with the required development plan as per state statute, we would then bring those items in front of you.
And to elaborate on Lauren's prior comment, and I agree with her characterization. I appreciate it makes it easier to have a policy in place to then score it and it passes or fails, but that's not a required element. You have considerable discretion as a governing body,
Right.
request by request, project by project. And then additionally, very more often than not, we talk about each decision setting a precedent. And so that's completely understandable as well. But more so than ever, we've had conversations about this is kind of an ever changing landscape and not wanting to set a precedent. The combination of making that clear in the front end, as well as adopting a policy shortly thereafter, I think if you as a governing body are comfortable collectively of proceeding, there's nothing that prevents you from doing that.
And one of the things I brought up last time is I would like to see us, again, continue to use Marty as we address these two projects to help us. We looked at return on investment and some different things. I think there's some things that Marty can help us with, even until we get that policy in place and kind of give us some guidance based on our need and what's being brought to us. And I think you've stated that you'd be willing to help us
Yeah,
with that.
we can definitely do that. Yeah, I think it would be, I would agree that I think we can say with some confidence that the two projects that have gone through would be compliant with this. But it will be, I think it would be worth the test to take it through and see what happens. In other words, to just sort of as an academic.
As a scoring,
exercise,
yeah,
score
I
it,
would
see
like
what
for us to
see
do
what-
that. Yeah, to see kind of where it scores.
Yeah. We certainly have enough information and more to
Sure.
do that. So, yeah, that would be a good thing.
Just to,
It's also important to calibrate it anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
just to follow up on what Commissioner Hoppick said, we talked about the development agreement and those negotiations are being the next step. At what point do we bring in the other taxing entities to either, to get their blessing or to have them decline? Because I attended the presentation at the county commission last week, and thank you both for doing that and for bringing them in the loop. But my question is, how much time do we put in before we get some sort of provisional, thumbs up or thumbs down? Do we go all the way through the negotiation and the development agreement before we hand the package to the county commission and USD 305?
My takeaway from the county conversation in particular was their desire to be involved early. I mean,
Yeah, that was the
technically,
same takeaway.
procedurally, we could, it'd be a gamble and it would not be very collaborative, but we could go through that whole process and just mail them notice and wait for the reaction. But the conversation we had at the county commission meeting was not, they seemed receptive. They at least were appreciative of the quandary that we find ourselves in. The county administrator in particular indicated a desire that we continue to collaborate, and that'd be my intention is, as we talk about the development agreement, keep them informed, keep them involved so that we're not at the tail end and then
Exactly.
hearing concerns. that we
Exactly.
need to double
Okay.
back and
That was,
address.
that was the kind of reassurance that I was looking for. And my final question, and I'm sorry if I'm monopolizing the time here, I'll try to keep it quick. At what point do we establish a relationship with the Kansas Housing Resources Commission? I think Marty's probably perfectly placed to speak to that, because I don't know if it's you specifically or your firm is
Yeah,
doing
or it's
the-
doing the state.
that's doing the
plan.
state
Yeah.
strategic plan and working with Chodo and working with the city. At what point do we bring them into these discussions and, and enlist them to help us match the best incentive with the project that we have, or, to get their
Yeah,
input on some
I
projects?
think actually this would probably be a good time. Lauren has been at one of the listening sessions. That's kind of where the state planning process is at right now. So there are all these various inputs and common themes that will be coming in.
I guess just to let you know, Mayor, what we have been doing with KHRC, because we've spent a lot of time, both the Economic Development Organization, Chamber, and the city over the last couple of months talking to KHRC about our problems. They're the ones who introduced us to Manufactured Home Owners Association.
Right.
And talking with them about productivity. We've been talking about with Department of Commerce, Lieutenant Governor, and the Executive Director of Kansas Housing Resource Corporation about our needs. In fact, we suggested they have a spotlight on their monthly developer call. Eric and I presented on that last week. We were their first initial community to do so. I just talked with Alyssa from Housing Development on Friday, just about where we're at with LIHTC applications, a couple of programs that had come through that maybe aren't a typical private sector developer, but were a combination of nonprofits with the private sector saying, the way I'm reading this, I see this and this could apply. Are you seeing that the same way? Yes, no. So we do have that relationship with
Okay.
KHRC and talk with them quite regularly.
No, then that's good to hear. And I know that we've discussed in the past that possibly the work that Marty has done for the Live Salina could supplement like the housing assessment tool that they
Yeah.
have for communities. But I also know that they have regularly scheduled meetings for communities to come in and say, here are projects, what aligns best with our needs. And I would just hate for us not to utilize a resource, a common resource that we're all trying to work toward the same thing. So
Yeah,
I would just encourage us to
yeah.
to build that relationship as strong as we
I
can.
think we will also probably generate some ideas for state legislation
Mhm.
out of this
Fantastic.
too. That there are some gaps that are, I think, highly desirable in the RHIDs and a couple of other things that should not really be that controversial, but they're not fundable right now.
And all of our city entities attended the state regional program for the meeting for the housing plan. And then I know that I was in the regional meeting for government officials speaking to housing. So we've been active in the state's planning efforts for the new housing plan. Even through the ESG program, we work quite often on the other side of KHRC, which is more housing or homelessness and emergency support for those types of things. So I think we've got both sides of those covered. When I reached out following the strategic planning where we talked about those resources, was gently nudged to say, yes, of course you could use those, but they're typically for smaller cities
Mhm.
who don't have as much staff or availability of consultants. But their response was typically, if you don't have something you feel you've got the right resources for, we're always here for you.
That's so good to know. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? All right.
No, just
All right.
one comment. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of the patience and in my experience, I've never been in a community that's cared so much about housing and wanted to get so deeply and intimately involved in it. So I appreciate you as a consultant, you really hope to have a great client and that makes you better too. And you guys have been great and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Marty. Appreciate your time, and we'll take a quick break for meeting 4. I'll take a quick stretch because All right, well, I would invite everyone into the room and we will go ahead and get the May 17th, 2021 Salina City Commission meeting underway. I'd like to confirm with staff that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been provided.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, we'll proceed to roll call.
Mayor Hodges,
Here.
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
If you're able, please stand to join us for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. All right, before we get to awards and proclamations, I did want to see if there was a consensus among the governing body in light of the crowd that we have here today to move item 7.5, the ordinance repealing the ordinance with the mask mandate, to move 7.5 up in the agenda to precede 7.1. Or would you prefer to leave it at the end of the agenda?
Be fine with me. Do we
I'm
need to
fine
make a
with that,
motion
Mayor.
to that
Yes,
extent?
please.
Mayor Hodges, I make a motion that we move item 7.5, being ordinance number 21-11058, to the beginning of administration in front of 7.1.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to advance item 7.5 to proceed item 7.1 in today's agenda. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, with that, we'll get to awards and proclamations.
Item 3.1, the week of May 16th through May 22nd, 2021 is National Public Works Week in the city of Salina. Heidi Black, Public Works Department, will read the proclamation.
Madam Mayor, Commissioners, I have with me Streets employee William Steck, and I would like to invite him to read the proclamation in my place.
Awesome, thank you.
Whereas public works services provided in our community are an integral part of our citizens' everyday lives. And whereas the support of an understanding and informed citizenry is vital to the efficient operation of public works systems and programs such as streets and highways, stormwater and levee systems, solid waste collection and disposal operations, municipal fleet maintenance services, water treatment and distribution, wastewater collection and treatment, engineering and inspection, public facilities, and whereas the health and safety and comfort of this community greatly depends on these services and facilities each and every day, as well as in times of emergency and community disaster. And whereas the quality and effectiveness of these services and facilities, as well as their planning, design, and construction, is vital, dependent upon the efforts and skills of public works officials. And whereas the efficient of the qualified and dedicated personnel who staff public works departments and maternally influenced by the people's attitude and understanding the importance of the work they perform. Now therefore, I, Melissa Rose Hodges, Mayor of City of Salina, do hereby proclaim the week of May 16th through May 22nd, 2021 as National Public Works Week in the city of Salina, and I call upon all citizens and civic organizations to equate themselves with the issues involved in providing our public works and to recognize the contributions which public works officials make every day to our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life. And witness whereof I have hereunto set my hands and caused the seal of the city of Salina, Kansas to be affixed this 17th day of May 2021.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last name.
Stack.
Steck. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Steck. I really appreciate it. Is there going to be any way that we're going to be celebrating or recognizing Public Works Week?
Yes, actually on Wednesday, General Services is planning on hosting an appreciation lunch for all the Public Works employees.
Well, fantastic. Well, please know that we appreciate all of your contributions so much because we always take it for granted that things are going to work and, sometimes they don't and you get called out in all kinds of miserable situations. And please know that whenever I see a crew working, I'm incredibly grateful for you guys being there to take care of the community.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
If you'd like to come forward and receive your proclamation. Thank you very much. And enjoy your luncheon. Thanks. Item 3.2.
Item 3.2, the week of May 16th through May 22nd, 2021, as Emergency Medical Services Week in the city of Salina. Kevin Royce, Fire Chief, will read the proclamation.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, Commissioners, good afternoon. EMS Week proclamation to designate the week of May 16th to 22nd, 2021 as Emergency Medical Services Week. Whereas emergency medical services is a vital public service, whereas the members of the emergency medical service teams are ready to provide life-saving care to those in need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whereas access to quality emergency care dramatically improves the survival and recovery rate of those who experience sudden illness or injury. Whereas emergency medical services has grown to fill a gap by providing important out-of-hospital care, including preventive medicine, follow-up care, and access to telemedicine. And whereas emergency medical services systems consist of first responders, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, emergency medical dispatchers, firefighters, police officers, educators, administrators, pre-hospital nurses, emergency physicians, trained members of the public, and other out-of-hospital medical care providers. And whereas the members of the emergency medical service teams, whether career or volunteer, engage in thousands of hours of specialized training and continuing education to enhance their life-saving skills. And whereas it is appropriate to recognize the value and the accomplishments of emergency medical service providers by designated Emergency Medical Services Week. Therefore, I, Melissa Rose Hodges, Mayor of the City of Salina, Kansas, in recognition of this event, do hereby proclaim the week of May 16th to the 22nd, 2021 as Emergency Medical Services Week with the EMS strong theme, This is EMS, caring for our communities. I encourage the community to observe this week.
Thank you very much, Chief Royce. Are we going to be doing anything special to celebrate or recognize our EMS workers?
Just not this year, just whatever we can. We had quite a trying year, as you can imagine. And
Absolutely.
we're coming out of it and we were very fortunate, and it's nice to recognize all of our people.
It is, and it's so nice to be able to count on those pre-hospital services. And thank you so much for making the presentation today. And please convey our thanks to all of the EMS workers.
Certainly will. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, that brings us to Citizens Forum. Citizens Forum is an opportunity for any member of the public to speak on an item that doesn't appear on today's agenda. If you would like to speak, please come forward, state your name and where you're from, and you will have 3 minutes to ask any questions, bring anything of interest to the commission. And that does go for people who are online as well. They can raise their virtual hands. Is there anyone who would like to speak? And I don't see any hands raised online either. Nope. All right, well then we will go ahead and proceed to the consent agenda.
6.1, approve the minutes of May 10, 2021. Item 6.2, approve the purchase of 20 stalker radars, ancillary equipment, shipping, warranties, and equipment installation.
Are there any items that a commissioner would like to remove from the consent agenda?
Nope.
Hearing none, I would accept the motion to approve.
Mayor, I move that we approve consent agenda item 6.1 and 6.2.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve consent agenda items 6.1 and 6.2. I just have one thing for clarification. And I'm sorry to put Mr. Bankston on the spot, but as we discussed prior to the meeting, because we have the audio, is it permissible to go ahead and do the vote by voice, or should we raise hands or continue to do a roll call in something like this?
I think either the raising of hands or the call for a voice vote is acceptable under the circumstances where anyone participating remotely is doing so via Zoom and not simply calling in. I understand the Attorney General's direction to be that the roll call is to be sure that anyone who doesn't have the video element can hear exactly who is voting and how.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that
And
clarification.
Mayor, there is one person that's called in, so.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, then we'll go ahead and just do the roll call then. Sorry,
Tried.
trying to get us past that, but I guess not quite yet.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye, that motion passes 4-0, which will take us to, we will proceed to item 7.5.
Item 7.5, approve ordinance number 21-11058, repealing ordinance number 20-11045, requiring the wearing of masks or other face coverings in public spaces.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank city staff for helping us to respond so quickly to the new CDC guidelines, because this was a very last minute agenda addition, as many of you are aware. And obviously, we need to address it before our May 24th meeting. With that, I'll turn it over to City Manager Mike Sprague.
Actually, I'm going to hand this off to
And-
the deputy city manager, Mr. Wood, for
All
the
right.
staff report.
Yeah, sure. I don't actually have a whole lot to report. The ordinance that's attached just repeals the ordinance that actually put the requirement to wear face masks or other coverings in public spaces. It just basically repeals that. This is in response to the CDC guidance that was put out last week that basically says that fully vaccinated people can resume activities without wearing masks or physically distancing in some circumstances, and also in response to the governor's indication that the state would follow those same guidelines. So really, the options that you have are just to approve the ordinance with amendments, or postpone it. I'm sure you don't want to do that one, so I'll leave that off the table. This will take 2 readings. So if you want to do this and complete it today, you'll have to approve the ordinance and then make a motion that would declare that there's a compelling public interest, that we do the first and second reading on the same date, and then do the second reading. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions if there's anything.
2 questions. One, if this is repealed today, does not become effective until it's published in the paper? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And we discussed that in terms of the timing of that. We, from an enforcement standpoint, it would be up to the police department. So we can certainly advise the police department to cease enforcement between your action and publication.
And did the CDC or the governor offer any suggestions as to how to settle if a private business still has a mask enforcement and a person claims they are vaccinated? Is there any proof required?
So the private businesses would still be able to dictate how they want to. They could still require masks if they want to. This is just for public spaces. So the private businesses could still do, the same thing they're doing today if they chose to do that. There's all kinds of guidance on the CDC's website that I didn't, get into great detail in the staff report on, but certainly private businesses can continue to do whatever they feel is best for interest of their employees or patrons.
Given I'm sorry, did I
I'm sorry,
interrupt you,
no.
Commissioner Ryan?
No
And
question.
just to follow up on Commissioner Davis's comment, to verify, we would be repealing the face mask ordinance, which would affect those who are vaccinated and those who are not vaccinated, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. We would no longer have an ordinance in effect
In effect,
requiring the
period.
wearing of face masks.
And, okay, given what I think is going to be the consensus here, I do have a proposal to make. I know a lot of you are here because you feel very strongly about the mask ordinance. And I think the way that we're moving today is that we're going to be removing the mask ordinance. But what I would propose is that we actually go ahead and make a motion and have that on the floor, because I think that that might serve to reassure some of those who are here and are planning to comment. Are there any objections to that, or would you prefer that we just proceed with the public forum as normal?
I'll be glad to make a motion if that's what we need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mayor Hodges, I move we approve ordinance number 21-11058, repealing the ordinance requiring the wearing of face masks.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to repeal ordinance number 20-11045, requiring the wearing of face masks or other face coverings in public spaces. With that being said, before I do open it up, if there are any members of the public that would still like to comment, you're welcome to do so. Just a brief statement that I have voted in the past to keep the City of Salina's mask ordinance in effect until the following criteria were met. We had made as much progress as we could toward the goal of a 70% vaccination rate of adults in the community, or had demonstrated that we had met the demand as it exists, that cases, hospitalizations, and mortality rates demonstrated a long-term reduction, to support the request by area educational institutions so that in-school learning had an optimum chance of success through the end of the academic year, and to align with current CDC guidelines. Well, last week when the CDC updated its recommendations and announced that it is safe for fully vaccinated people to resume normal contact and activities, the time is appropriate, I believe, to repeal the mask ordinance and to declare that a compelling public interest exists to allow first and second reading on the same day. The repeal of the mask ordinance, like all ordinances, like Mr. Wood noted previously, would be effective upon publication in the Salina Journal, but we do have the latitude to instruct the Salina Police Department to suspend its enforcement. But as we go forward together in these unprecedented times, let's please keep a few things in mind. The repeal of this ordinance does not change the fact that the CDC recommends unvaccinated people continue to wear masks indoors and to maintain social distancing. For the sake of the vulnerable members of our community, like those who are immunosuppressed or too young to receive the vaccination, if you haven't been vaccinated, please continue to wear your face masks indoors. That individual businesses and organizations have the ability to require masks in their place of business, and that citizens should respect those policies that have been established. I'd like to offer heartfelt thanks to Salinans who understood the importance of doing their part to limit COVID's effect on our community, who willingly complied with our mask ordinance, and who were vaccinated at their earliest opportunity. As we proceed with public comment, I'd like to reinforce that our action today is to repeal the face mask ordinance. Obviously, there's consensus among the commission that this is the appropriate action to take. While you're welcome to comment on our potential action to repeal the face mask ordinance, given the crowd assembled here today that I think wants to speak to that issue, I'd encourage you to keep your comments brief and not repeat what's previously been said. Thank you. Do we have anyone who would like to speak about the repeal of the mask ordinance at this time?
Mayor, Commissioners, Chad Farber here from Salina. It's been a long time coming, but I'm glad this board has come to this consensus. This has been a topic of controversy in our community, and I, for one, am glad to see this going away so that we can all come together again as Salinans and work towards the common goal of making Salina a better place. And so as I understand the consensus to be, I understand we haven't had the vote yet. I am looking forward to this repeal of this ordinance. And I would say, again, let's all get back on the same team and continue moving forward. I know there will be some difficulties with individual businesses, and I appreciate that latitude where businesses can make their own decisions. And I would say it's not our place as citizens to be arguing back and forth with the proprietors of those businesses, but that we can cordially get along and still make our point across. But thank you for all of the times that you've listened to me and to the fellow citizens behind me as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farber. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak today? Is there anyone who's got their virtual hand raised? All right, I'll bring it back to the commission for a roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry.
So that one comment.
Yes, sir.
I don't think any time in this, I have not considered us all on Team Salina. You know, our job is to make sure the government runs. When businesses shut down, employees are sick, and we've done our best to make decisions that keep the city going, and considering where we sit socially and economically and educationally right now, I would dare say we've done a pretty good job of coming through this. There are still, a lot of emails and calls that I get from people who are afraid of what's going to happen, because we are now all on the honor system, or will be on the honor system. So, you will now get a chance to see how many of your fellow citizens do make responsible choices. But you won't know what their choice is unless they make you sick, or what their choice was. So it's even more important now that if there's fear about getting the disease, and the disease is still active, get vaccinated. I do have just a few suggestions. And last comments. For those of us who've been, or were stuck at home with our spouses, mates, pets, kids, whatever, I hope the 15 months was enjoyable. I actually got to spend more time with my wife than I probably would have, and it was great. The one thing that I liked about the mask is that it reinforced good behavior. When people are in car accidents and they hurt their neck, we put a soft little collar on the neck. That collar wouldn't keep you from moving your neck if your life depended on it. But what does it tell you to do? Well, don't look way up on the ceiling. Don't bend under the sofa. Don't turn your head to back the car up. It's a reminder. And for many, the mask is a reminder: wash your hands, cover your cough. Don't pick your nose unless you have a washcloth to clean it with. Don't stand over other people's food and talk to them when they're eating. Wipe your doorknobs. And most importantly, I hope we've learned, despite the Kansas work ethic, if you're sick, stay home. And it's not just for coronavirus, but it's the flu we get every year. I'm hoping as a society we have learned some healthier habits from this. Despite my public stance, I love to walk around without this. I'm vaccinated. If I see somebody who's coughing and looks sick, from my training, I'm probably not going near them anyway, coronavirus or no coronavirus. But just make smart citizens, and remember, your mask, if you're sick, is to protect those around you. It's not to protect necessarily you. And this is where we really find out how much we care about our fellow citizens as opposed to just ourselves. So I thank the city for putting up with this as long as we have. But I think when you look at the social and economic success that we're still enjoying here, it's been worth it. And I think there's a reason other cities look to Salina for direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from commissioners?
Just a quick comment, I think it's been made a couple times, is I just ask that as citizens, we respect each other, whether you're pro or anti-mask. We as individuals don't know of the comfort level others have or the health issues that someone may have. So please respect the businesses that require you to continue to wear them. some of those are coming from corporate headquarters in different states. And the individuals working there are just paid to work there, and they shouldn't be harassed by those that have a different feeling. So let's treat each other with respect. I think Salina is a caring community, and I think we can do that and get past this. And hopefully in a few more months, it won't even be required that anybody wear a mask in any facility. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Ryan, anything?
Nothing for me.
All right. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye. That motion,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, that motion passes 4-0 and
Mayor Hodges, I move that we declare that there's a compelling public interest exists to allow first and second reading of the ordinance on the same day.
Second.
we have a motion to declare a compelling public interest exists to do the second reading on the same day. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0.
Since I'm on a roll,
Mhm.
Mayor Hodges, I move we approve ordinance number 21-11058 on second reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance 21-11058 on second reading. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye. And that motion passes 4-0. Thank you all very much for being here today. I appreciate it. And hopefully.
Feel free to stick. We're not throwing you
Yeah,
out.
yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, you're welcome to stay for the whole thing. But if you were here for that, thank you for coming. With that, we will move on to item 7.1.
Item 7.1, Campbell Plaza redevelopment acquisition request discussion.
All right, Mr. Scragg.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I want to start by acknowledging that you have some supplemental information at your dais, and I'll walk you through that here in a bit. I'm going to start out. Tim Blake's here on behalf of Wheat State Properties and Wheat State Hospitality, I'm sorry, and we'll be prepared to answer questions in greater detail. But you may recall that not too long ago, you had a proposal before you from Restore Properties, who was asking or requesting consideration of transferring ownership of Campbell Plaza, and it all related to development of building adjoining the plaza to the north for the potential sale and then operation as a restaurant by Mr. Blake and his group. So things have changed a little. You sent us away with some feedback in terms of what your concerns were and interest in a license agreement approach, more so than a property transfer approach. And we've been meeting on a weekly basis since then to flesh out the operational challenges that Wheat State would experience with Campbell Plaza in its current configuration, and a possible model to balance those interests, redevelopment of Campbell Plaza, and kind of the city's interests. So what we have before you today is our efforts to kind of take all that into account. And there's quite a bit of information in the report, so I'll try to be brief. We looked at Campbell Plaza. As you know, the existing stage intrudes in the space considerably. While the plaza is oriented east to west, the stage is oriented north to south, and it dominates the plaza. So the conclusion was kind of coming out of your prior conversation, and then as staff and Mr. Blake looked at it, that the current stage was not conducive to the use. So the proposed approach, or the model that we've built, is to relocate that overhead structure out of Campbell Plaza, to remove the footprint or the actual concrete stage that's there now, and then install a new, smaller, reoriented stage on the east end of the plaza. We'll get to some renderings of that in a minute, with that being oriented to the west. Then to accommodate the desire to use Campbell Plaza in conjunction with Mr. Blake's restaurant, we talked about license agreement provisions, taking into account the feedback that you've given previously about wanting to maintain a 24/7 pedestrian way, which Mr. Blake was very receptive to, and we were able to accommodate that. So the proposed approach has an 8-foot pedestrian way set aside on the south side of the plaza. The remainder of the license area fenced with decorative fencing to be installed by Wheat State, installed and maintained by Wheat State. And then that space is able for, or made available for non-exclusive use by Wheat State, meaning they're able to use it for outdoor dining for their patrons, but they are willing to acknowledge that members of the public could also enter the plaza and use the tables and chairs they have out, the gaming area that they're proposing, they could intermingle with customers. And so the license agreement takes that into account as well. So the three elements of the approach were removing and relocating the overhead structure, moving the concrete stage, installation of a smaller overhead structure and stage in Campbell Plaza, and then, as I said, the 24/7 pedestrian access, the non-exclusive use, and then scheduling was another topic of conversation. Brad Anderson, on behalf of the city, the Arts and Humanities Director, and Mr. Blake and Salina Downtown Inc. discussed an approach that's described in the staff report, whereby SDI has kind of the farthest advanced opportunity to schedule activities in the plaza and on the stage, 365 to 181 days out. Then Wheat State has the opportunity from 180 days to 91 days to schedule. So they're doing that kind of taking into account SDI's plans, and then general reservations from the public would come after that 90 days or within that 90-day time frame. So it kind of creates a hierarchy where SDI can still do their programming. They just need to do that in advance. It allows Wheat State to then supplement the SDI programming, and then it still allows for public reservations if there's interest. So then the question becomes, what becomes of the stage, the overhead structure in Campbell Plaza? And we looked at a handful of options. The first thing we did early in the conversation was looked at the size of the stage in comparison to all of our existing plazas. We tried to figure out whether we could orient it differently in Campbell Plaza. We looked at Strand Plaza and other plazas in the downtown and couldn't find a location that was conducive. We had some conversation with you as the governing body previously about what we commonly refer to as the Ad Astra parking lot. It's a city-owned parking lot north of Ad Astra. And then we also looked at the possibility of trying to locate it in a way that anticipates the river renewal and possible plaza on 4th Street. In the end, we ended up back at the Ad Astra Plaza. All the other options, with the exception of the river project, just were not conducive in terms of size. The river project, while it is making forward progress, just isn't far enough along to really have some certainty to know where to relocate the stage and put the footings in place and do the site preparation that will be necessary. And given the timing of all this, that it didn't make sense to mothball the overhead structure and incur that cost twice in terms of mobilizing it. I think the added advantage of putting it in the Ad Astra Plaza, and there is an aerial rendering in the information that you've been provided of how it would lay into the corner of that parking lot. And so that is the southwest corner of Ash and Santa Fe. That is staff's best effort to, dimensionally recreate it in that corner. And with that orientation, not only is it directed at the Ad Astra parking lot owned by the city of Salina, but it also picks up the city county building parking lot that's west of there and is currently used for city staff parking during normal business hours. So the footprint of those two combined parking lots is just a little bit over an acre in size compared to the Campbell Plaza being about an eighth of an acre. So it creates another venue space in the downtown, a considerably larger space as well, with minimal impact on number of parking spaces and traffic configuration through the parking lot. So I think it represents an opportunity that's taken into consideration. So that then we then had to look at the budget, and those obviously there's more scope than what we'd intended for Campbell Plaza. So we went back and looked, and we do have funds left from the downtown project. I referred to it in here as the Star Bond project, but our funds for the streetscape. So there are a few items that staff had identified as remaining punch list items that we took into account, and you should see that as an attachment as well. But kind of walking you through that, the Campbell Plaza portion of the project we've yet to complete work. We put it on hold as the building is being repaired by Restore, and we couldn't get in, have both projects going on, Campbell Plaza and the building work at the same time. So there's $159,632 of budgeted expenditures that have yet to be spent because the project was put on hold. There are $384,415 of funds remaining. And so the added cost, the total cost that we've estimated for Campbell Plaza would be $242,004, which is an increase of $82,372. The estimated cost for the Ad Astra relocation and completion is another $80,363.75. So you combine all that together, and we're spending $162,735 more than we had initially anticipated. We have a reconfigured Campbell Plaza stage that's right sized to that space, and then we have the relocation of the stage to the Ad Astra parking lot, and that's a venue that wasn't in the original plans. So one of the things that was omitted from the packet, totally my fault. If you only knew how much time and effort we put into this, I have no idea how I overlooked it, getting it in the packet. But is the document kind of at the tail end or the second tab of the information that was at your desk? That is the public financing application, and in it, it has a number of renderings of Campbell Plaza from different vantage points. The very first page there is Santa Fe looking east, and you can see the stage kind of set in the background. And then the other one I would call your attention to is more of a architectural rendering and an aerial photograph or from an aerial view. That's it. So this is a rendering of the first and second floors of the restaurant. So they're in the middle. You can see kind of a, yes, the point, Jacob's got the pointer on the stage in the backside of the plaza. So you can see that 8-foot wide pedestrian way on the left or on the south. Then the next section is the remainder of Campbell Plaza, and it's showing game area and seating, and then the stage there on the west end. And then the next section is an interior view of the restaurant building itself. And so to give you a sense of kind of the footprint of the stage and its orientation in the plaza, that's the proposed configuration. I would also note that the license agreement makes provision for an outdoor set of stairs from the proposed restaurant that allows them access to rooftop dining on the roof of the first floor portion of the building on the east end. The stairs themselves are in Campbell Plaza, and they are part of the license agreement. License agreement does provide, it still reserves the city's authority to rescind the license agreement, and it does that by making provision that in the event that happens, they could either alter their internal operations. It's a capacity issue for the second floor. They could reduce that occupancy capacity on the second floor, or they could install an alternate set of stairs that's code compliant, which most likely would be within the interior of the building. It would eat up floor space on the first and second floor, but it's not impossible. And so that's a lot of information pretty quickly as it relates to kind of going back and revisiting the Campbell Plaza request and alternate approach by way of license agreement that you asked us to take a look at. I can stop there. I would say that a companion item with that is a public funding request for CID funds. If you'd like me to kind of finish up the whole conversation, I can do that. Okay. So like I said, this is a companion item. This is all predicated on the Restore completing the project, and then Wheat State acquiring the building, and the license agreement makes reference to that as well. And then it is a downtown investment eligible for public financing by way of our Star Bond financing, and the request is for CID financing for a new retail business. They've requested $352,500 of CID proceeds, and their total project, not counting kind of operating capital to get started, but just their initial investment is $1,175,000. So it's about a 30% CID funding compared to the overall project investment. So we've, in addition to the Campbell Plaza conversation, gone through the transferee agreement and that application process. I would note that the transferee agreement, we have modified it from the original template. We've learned, well, for two things. That template was really kind of drafted targeting the key projects, Homewood Suites, the alley, the garage, Stiefel, some of the old Chicago, some of those things that were time sensitive, and a couple of them just had a different approach in terms of funding. We've now kind of learned that, you know, the rest of these projects that we're doing transferee agreements for don't receive any funding out of any of the STAR bond proceeds, CID proceeds until the project's completed and receives a certificate of occupancy. So they're totally at risk on the front end until they achieve that completion. So a lot of that language that was geared at, you know, performance milestones and commencement dates and things like that, we've identified as we don't necessarily need to be that dialed in as long as we kind of take that pay-as-you-go approach. Number one, payment doesn't start until the project's completed, and it's now payment in full. It's on an annual basis if funds are available. And you may recall from the information previously provided that they kind of go into a priority order of the applicants in the order that they're approved. So in the event that there's not full funding, there's provision made for holding back payment for those that are lower in priority. So with all those things in place, the risk is considerably on the applicant more so than the city or any of our project funds. With that, I'll pause and offer to take any questions. I think Mr. Blake would like an opportunity to walk you through his project, and I'm positive he's ready to answer questions, probably more so than me.
But before we go any further, I do want to comment that I recused myself before on this, but I have checked with city staff and also with legal counsel. This is a new license agreement and transferee agreement with a separate entity that I currently do not have a conflict of interest with. So just in case any of the fellow commissioners had any questions, I wanted to.
Mayor, and I would note the same instance for me before because of the change of the applicant. I'm no longer at conflict either.
So.
And then I apologize. There is one other piece of information, one other additional document that was at your dais that I probably should walk you through. There were some changes made to the license agreement. We had mixed references between an 8-foot dimension and a 10-foot dimension for the pedestrian, the dedicated pedestrian way, and 8-foot is the correct dimension. The other thing that we tried to address in greater detail was authority over the space, with it being a non-exclusive use. Wanted to be sure that we were protecting Weed State's ability as related controlling alcohol access under their license. People just bringing alcohol in from the outside, making sure they had the authority there. They also, when asked for confirmation on our part that when they closed the plaza in the evenings, that they had sufficient authority to not allow anyone to be in there, homeless persons or otherwise. And so there are a handful of changes that are shown as red lines in the document that's at your seat. In the recital section C, there's clarification about the pedestrian way and its uses as a designated outdoor dining, recreation, and entertainment area, and that it be open at a minimum of 7:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. each day. The Weed State is accepting responsibility for controlling that in terms of opening it and closing it. On the next page is corrections to the dimensions that I mentioned. In section 3, in terms of perimeter fencing and gating, and it's more clear that Weed State shall be responsible for assuring that no persons utilize or remain within the licensed plaza after 10 p.m. and securing the licensed plaza. In the open to the public outdoor dining section, we added more detail in terms of kind of the provisions as it relates to our ordinances about sidewalk dining and application of liquor license format. And then there's another section B about consumption of alcoholic liquor, that the city reserves the ability to govern the basis on which alcohol may be consumed. And that's basically on the premise that they'll be operating under their license, but there's also an opportunity by state law to have a common consumption area. If there were a festival in the downtown and we went through ABC and got licensing and designated an area where people could walk from location to location with alcohol, then just kind of reserving the ability to make that part of a broader plan. And then the last thing I would tell you is we did identify that we reference as attachments our ordinances regarding sidewalk dining and design review. And the ones that were attached did not account for your most recent revision. So we'll provide the updated ordinances as attachments to the final license. With that, I'll stop and take questions.
Two questions. On the blue sheet, the third paragraph mentions Mr. Blake and Wheat State as the prospective purchaser. Is that
Correct.
Are we making an agreement on the assumption that he will be, or can we make an agreement with him as the prospective?
Yeah, in the event that it does, he is the other part, Wheat State is the other
Right.
party to the agreement. So in the event that that doesn't happen, then the license agreement would be null and void. This is basically putting everything in place so that he can have the confidence to go ahead and carry through with the purchase.
And on the reservations, during the last 90 days, is it open to public and SDI, and I'll get the name together soon.
Wheat State,
Weed State, that's, I'm trying to remember the name of the prickly pear. So anyone can schedule the last 90 days, or is it exclusive to the public for the last 90 days?
anyone could schedule.
I mean, any one of those, public, Weed
Correct.
State, or SDI?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
It's just kind of giving that lead time to SDI first and the prickly pear second, and then, whether that's Super Bowl Sunday or the Royals make it to the World Series, prickly pear is probably going to be interested in those, but then we can backfill them with.
Okay, so if
other
a,
reservations.
let's just say a nonprofit in town knew ahead of time, they wanted to schedule something 7 months out, they should go through SDI.
Correct.
to do
Yeah,
that.
the reservation process SDI is our designee, so it would be through SDI or whatever our designated process is.
Okay.
But I have to say, Mr. Blake was very accommodating in terms of, recognizing kind of the community aspect of it. And I think as simple as that's helpful for their business as well.
Just one sort of practical question. I'm assuming that you want to use the outdoor seating to serve guests.
Absolutely.
Now, if someone, unless I'm reading this wrong, if someone just wants to come in there and sit, how do you politely say, well, we're trying to serve our customers here? And that, could you leave? But I mean, how does that work?
For sure. Well, and again, Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for having us and hearing us and helping us flesh this out. I first like that the city staff has been fantastic in numerous meetings and putting all of this together. To answer that question directly, we want this to be an enhancement to that plaza that we view as underutilized and underused to this point. And we understand that it's going to be open to the public. We're going to find a solution that works. We want it to be welcoming to everyone. We're not going to ask that individual to leave. If you want to come down and eat, read a book, enjoy our free Wi-Fi, by all means. We want this to be a gathering place for the city of Salina. We view this project and this concept as what we hope will become the unofficial front porch of downtown. And we really want this to be a gathering point. And I think, as the city manager pointed out, we really tried to work with Arts Humanities and SDI, and we want to complement all of their programming. We don't want to replace it. We want to have a lot more, frankly. And to your point on the nonprofit, I welcome that event. I'm happy to host it if it's a wine walk check-in, or if it's a pick your project that we currently have in place, a sculpture tour. By all means, have it in that plaza. We would love to serve that crowd throughout the event, and before and after. I welcome that crowd. So,
Thank you.
Questions? I'm not sure whether these questions are for Mr. Blake or for staff, so I'm just gonna, probably a little of both. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start down my list here real quick. In the event that we proceed with Campbell Plaza as is and execute the finished project as it was originally intended, we've lost what, at least a year and a half, 2 years on this project?
Yeah, I don't know the exact timing, but yes, there's been quite a delay and we expect there'd be a cost increase just to complete
Just for the
the original
delay.
scope.
So if we were to decide to go ahead and proceed with Campbell Plaza, what's the earliest date that we could get it completed by, and what's going to be our cost increase because of the delay?
May have to rely
Any sense on that?
Jim, do you? We've had that conversation with staff. Staff's been in contact with Smoky Hill, and one of the things we have to do is be accommodating of their schedule. They've moved on to other work, so we don't have the ability to just kind of force them to pick the project back up. So I know that there's anticipated sizable cost increases, and I don't know that we know a definitive completion date.
Okay, because I mean, right now it's listed as $160,000 more or less is to complete it as originally proposed. But we know that there's going to be significant inflation and significant delay because of
Yeah, I'd say
remobilizing.
both of those are fair, yes.
And do we have any sense on the timing of getting them back to complete the project?
I didn't hear the last part because I was trying to get the answer to the first
No
part.
problem. Basically,
Madam Mayor and Commissioners, Jim Floyd, Public Works.
cost inflation and revised timeline to remobilize Smoky Hill.
In reverse order, revised timeline is, we think is going to be this winter before they would be able to begin work. And I don't have the figure with me. I seem to recall that it was in the neighborhood of $280,000 to do the project as originally designed.
Thank you. Might stay there just for a minute. Are the planters holding up the building at this point? Because I noticed that those haven't been demoed. And I don't know that they were going to stay there in the original plan. Are they a structural element of that building at this point?
No, I think they stayed because of the interrelationship and trying to work in close proximity, but the whole intention was to let them get their wall secured before we took the planters out.
Okay, so the planters aren't going to pose a structural issue to the removal of the planters are not going to, okay, okay.
If they do today, they won't by the time we get done.
Correct.
That wall's gonna have to be self-supported.
Right. I saw that there's like an $80,000 figure to complete the new stage that would be in the Ad Astra parking lot. Which I think is, sometimes you guys are like hopeless optimistic, optimists. I mean, I was like, $80,000, come on. Is that in any way, shape or form going to deal with like the resurfacing of that parking lot? Or is that just specifically to build a new stage and to erect the overhead structure?
Right. The surface maintenance was already our responsibility. This is part of our normal programming, so we didn't include that number in. this
Right.
estimate.
But it is included in the 2021 mill and inlay program. So we do have it scheduled.
Okay, so that parking lot is going to be addressed this year.
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see. So that's going to mean that SDI is programming 3 stages downtown? I mean, do they program the 67401 Plaza?
Hmm.
So you're going to have 2
They do.
stages in the same parking lot, another stage, Camel Plaza. So they're going to be programming 3 stages. Is that with the proposal as it is?
And potentially, I don't know that they'll all be programmed at the same time, but it creates options. And
Okay.
Brad Anderson's probably the most knowledgeable on that.
Brad Anderson, Director of Arts and Humanities. I can't speak directly for SDI, but I can explain a little bit about what my knowledge of the current level of programming. Salina Arts and Humanities has utilized some of its annual programming dollars to program for Campbell Plaza or for local businesses that wanted to integrate arts programming into their annual plans and programs. And lately, the Ad Astra Plaza, or the plaza just to the north of Ad Astra, has been an area that we've utilized in part because Campbell Plaza hasn't been available both during construction and after. We actually we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow with board members of Salina downtown, or board members and staff from Salina downtown, and our staff, to further articulate kind of those partnerships and those opportunities to program and to schedule. I will say from a community arts basis, we were cautious when the request first came up, but also very optimistic about this opportunity to have additional places to program arts and entertainment, especially with an upcoming articulation of a new arts and entertainment district that you'll be considering in the coming months, that the stakeholders for downtown Salina Arts and Humanities and the Lauren Driscoll's department, public or community services or development services will all be coming together. So I think with the revitalization of the downtown, what Mr. Blake has expressed in terms of wanting to activate that area in a ongoing way. We've heard the words public and private partnership before, but we're excited about the opportunity to have more places to program and to energize, to enliven the downtown than less. And so while there are certainly both budgetary and functional challenges with that, SDI has additional funding as part of the new development agreement of the downtown for programming specifically. I don't know exactly how much they had planned on utilizing or allocating for programming directly, but I know that there is more money than there was prior to the reconstruction of the downtown. And so we're looking forward to that opportunity to energize in each of those spaces as they come available.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of looking at the contingency for the remaining funds we have in the Star Bonds project, I notice there's planner repair estimates of 25,000, drainage issue estimates of 25,000, and additional bollards. The drainage issues, I had some questions about. Is that not something that was that the contractor would perform as?
They are, but the thinking was that we may find drainage issues that we're responsible for, that we need to hold some funds back for.
Okay. And I know that this may not be the conversation for right now, but wouldn't the engineering and design firm bear some responsibility for that as well, unless the sidewalks weren't executed according to their specifications?
But
Or no?
I'll let Jim answer, but we talked about that, and I think his thinking is leaving him some funds to discretionarily say, we want to do more. We want to put a drain here. We want to, go above and beyond in terms of solution.
There are a few areas. We had a punch list. I don't remember. Perhaps Dan remembers that we had a punch list. I think of 10 or 12 locations that we felt had drainage issues. We met with the contractor. They subsequently fixed many of those locations. We still have some more work to do with them, and that is all at their expense. I have additional concerns that maybe go beyond what the original design was, and it isn't something that I would say. I can't speak to whether it's the contractor or not, but it seems to me that there may be some improvements that we need to make in the future regarding drainage. And as Mike mentioned, it's honestly more, there's a few areas that I think that we may end up needing to install drains or something like that. And I would like to, I just want to be honest, make sure that we have enough funds to make those kinds of repairs should we find the need in the future.
What about-
Obviously, we wouldn't do it if we didn't, you know, if we didn't have that need, then we wouldn't spend that
Right,
portion of the money.
right. And in terms of the planner repairs, I was just curious as to what those were.
So this is just something that I've noticed since I've been here. I've been downtown several times looking at the project, and I've noticed that while the planners were installed in accordance with the plans, they are, you know, sawed and everything, but I've also noticed some cracking and some of the concrete itself chipping away. So I've had several thoughts. We're looking at the possibility in the future of having to skim coat those, making repairs, cutting out sections of curb that is just bad, that needs to be fully replaced. And then the possibility of looking for a surface material to put over top of the skim coating, if the skim coating wouldn't be enough. And again, this may be me being overly precautious, but I felt it important enough to speak to the city manager about it. And I think it's important that we think about setting some money aside to protect our investment in the future.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And again, I think this is maybe a discussion to have on a different, at a different time.
I understand
but-
that, but we've also got to be responsible
Yeah,
for
I-
how we use our remaining streetscape.
Right.
too.
My question, two-part question. First of all, and I wasn't here during this last large rain we have, but the work that they have done to the prior places we asked them to deal with the drainage, do those seem to be working correctly?
Yes, they made some very good improvements. I did ask them to come back. They did the work and then they went out of town on another project, but they fully intend to come back. I asked them to come back because while it works, I didn't really like the aesthetics of it and I thought we should do better. And so they agreed they will come back and make sure that the bricks are properly set in place, and that it looks uniform while still providing the drainage that's necessary for that area.
And again, being involved with sculpture tour, I spent, considerable time down there a couple of weeks ago, and I did notice the cracking. I was going to bring that up on the planners. Would that not be some type of a guarantee or some type of?
It could be, it's a relatively new topic. We are
Yeah.
gonna have to pursue that.
I was surprised at the amount of cracking in some of them. And to me, based on the timeline of when those were installed, again, I think that should fall on the contractor, but
Oh, I think I have photos from a year ago when we were talking about a punch
Yeah.
list and I went around and yeah, the cracks have been there
yeah.
as long as a year ago.
And we haven't definitively reached a conclusion. This is just kind of a holdback in the
Okay.
event that we need some funds to
So,
address it.
okay.
I do want to clarify my comment earlier. Dan immediately flagged me and said, Jim, I don't think that 280 is right. He pulled up the email from the contractor and the contractor did say that they could still complete the project at 160. I do not remember why I'm remembering a larger amount. I'm not sure, but I wanted to clarify that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
That says a lot about that contractor, Joe. Give him credit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Blake, I didn't mean to cut you off. Is there anything that you wanted to present to the commission at this point or anything? further
I'm
to
open
say?
to questions at this point without the risk of being redundant, keeping you here longer than you need to be. But I'm definitely available for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Blake? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
When are you planning on opening? Which is probably what everybody at home wants to know.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, October 1st is our target date. Right now, we're looking to go as fast as possible. We feel we're about a year behind on the project, and October 1st, November 1st, this fall. And that's what time's really been of the essence throughout this whole process. And city staff has just gone above and beyond to help us expedite this and get back in front of y'all. And we really appreciate it. And is we want it to be a project that it is done the right way but it can really be something special to bring to downtown Salina.
Thank you for saying so.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Appreciate it. If there aren't any further questions for staff, I will open it up for public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on this item?
Abner Perney, of course, I lived there adjacent to, in the 129 building, adjacent to Campbell Plaza for 14 years. This revised plan from the Prickly Pear organization, I like that name, is much better than it was earlier. I like the idea that it is going to a license agreement, and that it did take into account my big concern of having 24/7 pedestrian access between the parking lots in Santa Fe. So I'm in favor of the present proposal so far as I can tell, except I was a little, since I didn't get to see the plans until just now on the screen, I was a little concerned about, again, the whole concept of having the Campbell Plaza canopy, the present stage canopy moved to Ash and Santa Fe. I think that will work out all right. I like the idea that the decorative metal and the coloring goes with the bridges and the crossovers. And that will all, that would still look good and be out where people would see it. It does trouble me, we have so many outdoor stages. So if there's a money bind, I would think that we could delete the small stage in Campbell Plaza in its entirety and just go with the one a block and a half away up at Ad Astra. And as far as the 67401 one is so small, it's almost irrelevant. So just leave it alone. Occasionally we've seen pickup groups of customers and people that in Ad Astra go out and play there in the afternoon with no permit and no formalities or anything, just guys getting together and jamming. So that's been kind of cool a couple of times I've seen it happen. At any rate, I'm eager to see this go through. It's been a long time on Campbell Plaza being closed and torn up.
Thank you, Mr. Perney. Mr. McDowell, I would remind you that we still do have a mask ordinance officially in place, and I'd ask that you wear it when you speak at the podium. Thank you.
Dalton City, Salina. Only concern I see with that picture, with that, where that placement of that stage is visibility on that corner. Because it looks to me like it's gonna be right up next to the sidewalk. And visibility with that stop, with the light right there.
Hello, Guy Walker, Salina 2020. I just wanted to share our support for the project. Just a few things that I thought were worth mentioning, and I know Tim touched on some of them, but one of the reasons we felt so strongly about supporting it and supporting a 30% incentive was the fact that it's unique for downtown, the food offering, and really the concept, I think, with that big of an outdoor area is kind of unique for the whole city. We thought that was pretty, a really neat thing for downtown, and especially to hear Tim describe it as the front porch for downtown, which I think, every downtown should have something like that really draws people in. And we think that is just really great. Something that to me, it's a neat way to kind of leverage that public space and have somebody who's willing to keep it clean and serve food and, and drinks and things like that is pretty awesome. So the city doesn't have to do it. And, SDI doesn't have to do it. It's a private business doing it. And it's a locally owned person who has a successful track record, which is also really encouraging. I know one thing I know it's never easy to contemplate spending extra money, but it is a good way to leverage, I feel like, the private investment into the building, saving a very, very, very dilapidated building as well. And they're going to, I think the city's payback and the citizens of Salina's payback is the revenue projection that they have is really strong. and the sales tax that that'll generate for the district and for the city should easily pay back, I think, what the city is spending, is being asked to spend. So anyway, I just wanted to share Salina 2020 support and thank Mike and Tim for working late, trying to get it in on Thursday. So any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Walker?
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Guy didn't give himself credit. He was right along with Tim and I slogging through it, so.
Any other questions or comments from the public? Any questions or comments online? No? Okay, I will bring it back to the commission for further discussion or action.
Well, there's some question marks where there usually
Yeah.
periods here.
I apologize. That's my fault too. That was a placeholder while I got the titles of the documents. I think you're probably better off on the front page. Item A and B are the action items. Your options are to authorize execution of the license agreement and the transfer agreement, to authorize them with amendments, to postpone their consideration, or to deny them.
Okay. Mayor, I move to authorize the city manager to execute a license agreement with Weed State Hospitality Incorporated.
Second.
We have a motion.
Good.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, no, it is a good place to cut me off.
We have a motion to authorize the city manager to execute a license agreement with Wheat State Hospitality Incorporated. Could we have a roll call?
Do we need a second on
I
that?
thought
I didn't
Commissioner
hear
Ryan.
you. Okay, I
sorry.
did hear. Okay.
Commissioner Ryan
Okay.
seconded. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Nay, and that motion passes 3-1. The next item for the authorization for the transferee agreement. Is there a motion?
Yeah, Mayor, I move to authorize the city manager to execute a transferee agreement with Wheat State Hospitality Incorporated.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to authorize the city manager to execute a transferee agreement with Wheat State Hospitality Incorporated. And I am going to vote for this item because I think that if Salina 2020 endorses it, and this is a use of the CID funding that we want to see, that's all well and good. I do have reservations about the plans or for executing Campbell Plaza and for Ad Astra, a stage at the corner of Ash and Santa Fe for the new Ad Astra performance stage. If we could have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye, that motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much,
And,
gentlemen.
and I hope that Tim and West Blake make as good a tacos as they do ribs. So we'll
That would
see.
be great.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Got so many papers running around here. All right, item 7.2.
Item 7.2, approve resolution number 21-7958, authorizing the city manager to sign a service agreement with OCCK Inc. for 2021.
Oh,
That's
right.
that's
Ms.
going to
Pack
be
isn't
me.
here. I was looking for
Thank
her,
you, Mayor and
so-
Commissioners.
Yes.
Ms. Pack wasn't able to be here, and I'm going to take this report. As you well know, we partially fund a number of services that OCCK provides. Not the full breadth of the services that they offer, nor do we fully fund their offerings. But we do provide funding for fixed route public transit, modified paratransit, and then we contribute funds to annual capital improvements. And typically, they receive 70% of their funds from Kansas Department of Transportation, and we supplement the other 30%. We learned a couple of lessons through COVID. They were able, KDOT stepped up last year and funded at 100% all the way through June of this year. And so we took that into account as part of our budget preparation for 2021. And so our payment will be beginning shortly. We enter into an annual agreement with OCCK, and so this is a renewal of that agreement with a couple of revisions. One being, and they are redlined in the staff report that you received. One of those accounting for the possibility of a decrease in funding. We really hadn't anticipated that previously, but in that experience with receiving grant funds, it provides for a proportional reduction in city funding. And then the other is just the formalizing the process for changes in fees on the part of OCCK. As part of the COVID, their response, they offered up free fares and things like that. And again, we hadn't really contemplated significant changes in fares, just promotional fares previously. So this is always just renewal with those two revisions and accounting for the reduced funding level for 2021. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I can see that Pat Willarius is here to answer questions as well from OCCK.
Thank you, Mr. Scragg. Are there any questions for Mr. Scragg or Mr. Willarius? No. All right, I will open it up for public comments. Are there any members of the public that have questions or would like to comment on this item? All right, it can be a quick one. I'll return it to the commission for further action discussion.
Mayor, I move approval of resolution number 21-7958, authorizing the city manager to sign a service agreement with OCCK Incorporated to formalize the funding request that was approved during the 2021 budget process.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 21-7958, authorizing the city manager to sign a service agreement with OCCK Incorporated for 2021. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0. All right. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my revised or 7.3.
Yes. Item 7.3, approve charter ordinance number 40, exempting the city of Salina from the provisions of KSA 12-1697 and providing substitute and additional provisions on the same subject relating to the promotion of tourism and convention, authorizing the levying of a transient guest tax by cities and repealing charter ordinance 35.
Mr. Wood.
Mayor and Commissioners, Deputy City Manager Jacob Wood. Over the last couple of years, we've talked about this item a few times. Most recently, well, actually, the City Commission requested that we bring this forward in April. So April 5th, we had a discussion about increasing the transient guest tax for baseball-related items. At that time, the City Commission asked that we postpone it for 1 week to allow us to notify hoteliers, people that might be impacted by an increase in transient guest tax, that we would be having a discussion. We did that, and then on April 12th, we had another discussion, and the City Commission asked that we postpone again to kind of get through our strategic planning session that was held on May 5th. So here we are. At the strategic planning session, there was discussion about the transient guest tax and using it for baseball-related projects. At the time, the City Commission indicated there may be interest in increasing the transient guest tax to 7.75% rather than the 8%. That was discussed previously. So the charter ordinance that it's attached here reflects that request to go to 7.75%. As you know, this is a charter ordinance, so it does take a 2/3 majority or 4 votes of the City Commission to pass. And this is a charter ordinance has a little bit more process than a regular ordinance. It has to have a first and second reading. It'll be public. There'll be publications, and then there's also a protest period that will allow the public time to put in a petition if they would like for this to not go through. I'd be at this point, the 7.75, the only remaining thing I'll mention is the 7.75% is expected to bring in about $293,000 annually, which would support a debt of about $202.5 million if we finance that over a 10-year period. The previous staff report goes into much greater detail, but I won't go through all of that tonight. But I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point. I did also want to mention that I did send out notice again to the hoteliers about this meeting and this discussion, and we didn't receive any response. So with that, I will be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any questions?
I have just one question on page 2, of the that's the actual ordinance. There's a breakdown of how the 6.7% current transient guest tax is distributed. Is this increase now, trying to do the math real quick, 1.25% increase going to the designated specifically for this project, or right now that will be done later? And the reason I'm asking is, I'd really like to see this termed money set aside for athletic facilities of economic development potential, for two reasons. One, so that if we get a whole boatload of money, other suitable uses could apply for the money.
So the ordinance that's in front of you today, all it does is give you the authority to increase the transient guest tax. The breakdown of how we have transient guest tax divided right now would stay the same.
Right.
At a later date, we'll come back with another ordinance that will actually do the increase of the tax. And between now and then, the city commission did ask that we go back and look at CARM and some of the other things. I anticipate we'll be having those discussions over the summer. And if there are changes to be made, we'll bring
So
those
the
forward at that
actual
time.
distribution will be handled, or the relative distribution. we can
That's
get at a
correct.
Later date.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
The 200 and, what'd you say, 290,000, what was that based on as far as total transient sales? What did you use to come up with the 290?
I don't have the actual total sales. It was the average of the last 3 years before
Okay, so
COVID.
you used the,
And Debbie's not here to answer that question, so.
I think on and I don't know if you're looking at the same
Yeah.
thing that I was, right?
the 3-year average was 27 million. Is that at the bottom of the,
Yeah, it's based on the same numbers that are in the staff report. We have a spreadsheet. We just plug in a different
which that's probably.
percentage rate, so it
that's
should
probably
be
a
about
little
the same.
high for the next year or so, I'm guessing.
I think the difference is the assumed term. We're dialed in on a 10-year term with that 2.5 number, 2.5 million.
Any other questions? I just have a couple. The first is just to make sure, and I believe I've asked this before of Ms. Pack, and she's confirmed. The backstop for this, if we do not have sufficient revenues in our transient guest tax funds, would be the general fund, correct?
It would be the general fund or the sales tax fund if you wanted to take it out of the allocation for parks.
Gotcha. And then, and this is the part that I'm sure that I've asked Debbie about before, but whether we make that payment from transient guest tax sales revenues, or we make them from parks or general funds, does it matter to our bond council as long as those payments are being made? Does the source of revenue matter?
No, I don't. I think we would have that flexibility. Transient guest tax has limited eligible uses of those funds, but we could certainly take that into account on the front end as we finance to keep our options open. If the concern is that we may have to backstop it, we could make provision for that.
Yeah. And I just wanted to make sure that like a backstop provision that we made wouldn't result in a downgrade for our bonds if we said, oh, we're going to pay this using transient guest tax, and actually, no, we're going to go ahead and use it for sales tax.
Right. When I say backstop, it really just kind of keeping our options open. So
Okay.
I think if we failed to make payment, that can impact our bond.
Yeah,
rating. But beyond that, I think
Well,
we'll be fine.
I just didn't know if the source of the payment made any.
And Mayor
difference.
Hodge, I guess you're talking about if we decide to fund somebody, if we decide to fund some debt servicing with the transient guest taxes, which we've
Correct.
not decided yet how much we're going to fund through.
Right,
Okay,
right. But
okay.
yeah.
Right.
Yes, exactly. I think you said that a lot better than I did. Okay. And then, so at this point, this change in the charter ordinance doesn't anticipate any like sunset date. It's just ongoing. Correct? I mean, we're not saying, okay, we're going to do it for 10 years and then it's over.
Correct.
This is a new tax and it's ongoing.
And you could, at the next go around, when you actually approve the increase of the tax, you could put a sunset date on it if you wanted to. This just simply gives us authorization to go up to that bottom level of 7.75. So what happens within that 7.75 is up to the commission.
Okay. And then my final question is, we have to do a charter ordinance on this item for the transient guest tax. Are we going to be anticipating another charter ordinance change in terms of the funding for the parks project? Like, don't we have statutory limits, like over $1 million bonded? We have to do a change in our charter ordinance on that. I don't remember what exactly the limit was, but
I believe that's correct, that there would be another charter ordinance change, but we really need to define what the project is and the total costs and who, I mean, if Baseball Enterprises is involved and they're spending a certain dollar amount, we really just don't have all that, the details of what the actual project is fleshed out yet to give us enough detail to change that charter ordinance. But as soon as we have that information, we certainly would have to change that charter ordinance.
yeah, and here's what I'm just trying to ensure, that like our timelines align for this. In other words, let's say we go ahead and we proceed with this charter ordinance change and there's not a challenge or there's an unsuccessful challenge. And then we have to do another charter ordinance change. And then there's another challenge to that. I mean, it's like, I would hope that we could kind of sync up those processes so that we could proceed with some sort of certainty, not get to a certain point, like all of a sudden it's November, we have to change the other charter ordinance. And then we've got to go back to that whole timeline with having, the protest period, the option for the election, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just wanted to see, are we contemplating doing a second charter ordinance change to exceed our
The
limits on-
second one would be necessitated by debt financing and the size of that debt financing.
Okay.
So if we get this revenue source in place, I think we could pursue options that don't require that charter ordinance change. It really depends on, as Jacob said, kind of what we do, what Baseball Enterprises might be willing to do, how we structure that. But I understand your concern that, if in a certain configuration, then it might, a second charter ordinance amendment might be needed, but I don't know that we're gonna know that in a timeframe that syncs up with this decision.
Thank you.
We can try to avoid it, more so than synchronize it.
Well, and I don't want to do something like we did with the irrigation project where we broke it up into year by year things to avoid hitting that statutory ceiling, because I thought that was kind of a manipulation of the process. But at any rate, I just wanted us to at least be aware that that's something that might be on the horizon. If there aren't any further questions for staff, I'll turn it over to the public. Are there any comments or questions from the public? And I don't see anyone with their virtual hand raised, so I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion or action.
Mayor, I move we approve charter ordinance number 40, exempting the city of Salina from the provisions of KSA 12-1697 and providing substitute and additional provisions on the same subject relating to the promotion of tourism and convention, authorizing the levying of a transient guest tax by cities and repealing the charter ordinance 35.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, to approve charter ordinance number 40. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye, and that motion passes 4-0. Item 7.4.
Item 7.4, City Commission appointment to fill vacancy.
All right, Mr. Sprague, do you want to start us off, or do you want me to?
I can certainly start us. I don't know that I have anything to share that you don't already know, but I'll try to keep it brief. On April 28th, we officially received Commissioner Rod Franz's resignation. You had a conversation on May 3rd about the process to fill that vacancy, and the agreed upon approach at that point was that you wanted to communicate an application deadline of May 12th, have it in your packet on May 17th, which would have been last Thursday. I say solicit applications by way of expression of interest forms and have those in your packet by May 17th, which was last Thursday. At that time, you had some conversation about you didn't know what to expect in the way of response, so the goal would be to take it up at today's meeting, but kind of reserving the option to take additional time if you felt like the numbers were, a number of applications necessitated that, but didn't really speak about a number in particular. So we've received 11 expression of interest forms. Kay Crawford was one of the applicants, and she subsequently withdrawn her application, indicated that she wasn't sure whether you'd get good turnout, was volunteering herself up in the event that that might be the case, but seeing how many applications you did receive, she chose to then withdraw. As we've discussed before, there's very few specific statutory or ordinance requirements about the process of filling a vacancy, other than it's by a majority of the remaining commissioners, and the person appointed has to be a qualified elector in Salina in terms of residency and those qualifications. I did attach to the staff report a couple of things, one being your rules of procedure. And a couple of things of note there, by the rules of procedure have adopted the Robert's Rules of Order as kind of a backstop of procedural issues that we don't rely on directly all that much, but felt like it might be applicable in this instance. And then specifically, I excerpted, highlighted, and attached chapter 14 of the Robert's Rules of Order as it relates to nominations and elections. And so took the liberty of highlighting that. And I did also try to point out that the rules of order of procedure grant some discretion to the mayor in terms of presiding over the meeting. In the event that you individually or as a group want to kind of deviate from the rules of procedure or Robert's Rules of Order, you could do that by consensus if there's a general consensus among you, or if there's not obvious consensus, you could do that by a motion and a vote to whatever that procedural topic might be. Robert's Rules of Order itself offers, it isn't directly written for the purpose of city commissions, obviously doesn't take into account some of the things that we have to deal with, but it does talk about taking nominations from the floor, and provides that the member does not need to be recognized and a second is not required. It also offers up that, kind of when it appears that no one else wishes to make a nomination, then that's when the chair would close the opportunity to make nominations. And voting can be by different methods, but ballot really isn't an option for you. As being a public meeting, it needs to be a public vote. And so it talks about a roll call vote, which we talked about earlier this evening in terms of just the necessity of us doing that. And then it also talks about like viva voce election, meaning that you vote on if there's multiple nominees, you vote on them in the order nominated, and then at the point that the first one that obtains a majority vote, then you're done. You've made your selection. So with that, you have copies of all of the expression of interest forms. I'll get out of your way and let you deliberate on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Scragg. Well, first of all, I think we all want to, if Commissioner France or his family, if they're watching this evening, we want to wish him all the best in his ongoing recovery. And I do want to thank all the citizens who put in their expression of interest forms. It's really heartening to see the quality and the quantity that we received. I would suggest that we start working through the 3 questions that staff posed to us on page 2. Based upon the number of applications received, does the city commission wish to make the appointment on May 17th, or do we prefer to set another date? Do you feel prepared and ready to make an appointment today?
I am prepared to make one, and then if we can't do it, then I'll be prepared next Monday, but I'm prepared to do it.
All right. I wanted to make sure I'm going. Mr. Scragg set some good questions. I'm going through them here. Are we going to, I'm looking to all of us here, go ahead and follow the process as outlined in Robert's Rules of Order, where we open the floor for nominations. Nominations are received, and then we vote on each nominee? Or do you see another way that you would like to propose handling that?
And
After
I'm sorry,
having-
just to
Did
clarify.
I not?
No, no. Well, my understanding is you hypothetically, you could open it for nominations. Each one of you could nominate someone. You could
Exactly.
have 4 nominees and then you would vote in the order that.
That they were nominated. Right, right. I'm sorry.
After having gone through this before, it's very tough to, when in effect you're voting for someone, you're voting against someone else. And, looking at the list of candidates here, I think there's only one that I don't know personally, and probably none of you would I not trust my kids to be with. So it makes comments that we're going to make difficult sometimes and sensitive. But I don't, since we're not allowed to do secret ballots, I don't know.
I don't anticipate.
I just thought maybe there'd be a last minute reprieve and somebody would change the law, but I guess not.
I don't,
So-
I don't see us going all 1979 South Middle School mean girls on this, but, but I can throw down if necessary. But are we all okay just in terms of the process of that being the process that we open for nominations, we receive the nominations, and then we vote on each candidate in the order that they were nominated? Are we okay with that process?
Yeah, so do we make comments about the applicant or we just make the nomination and that's?
Well,
it?
okay,
I'm just
okay.
asking.
Well, here's what I was proposing.
Yeah.
The third question is specific discussion and
Oh,
consensus
that's right there.
on the
Yeah.
process of the governing body wishes to utilize to deliberate on the nominees. Last week, I had specifically reached out and invited the applicants who had submitted an expression of interest to be here at the meeting today, and told them that they would have the opportunity to speak if they wished. And the reason that I'd like to justify that is while we are casting a vote to replace a member of one of us on the governing body, one of you candidates that is selected tonight is going to be speaking for the people. And I just want to allow you the opportunity to introduce yourself, to tell people why you want to be a commissioner. And for those of you that are former commissioners, you're certainly welcome to share successes, things you wish you would, you want to get accomplished. Because ultimately, our deliberations tonight are taking the place of an actual election. And 2 of us here were appointed and subsequently had those appointments validated by election results. But
I have,
I just, I
I have a quick,
Possibly, so to avoid us making campaign speeches for the nominees, we could do a round of nominations amongst us. And then if those candidates are present, if they wish to get up and speak, they could. The one time I participated in this process, I believe the mayor at the time went through kind of the chairs here in our order, and the nominations were made and dealt with individually. But in this case, possibly it's your discretion. You might want to hear from all of us, and then we take the list and see if we can get there.
do you want to, all right, I'm looking at the other 2.
Well,
Do you want to start with the nominations and invite those nominees to speak?
yeah,
Or would you like to
my
do-
question was, and I guess, because I know you made a short comment at the end of last week's meeting, was each candidate personally invited to be here today?
No, that was a remark I made during other
I
business
have
last week.
I have a little trouble since they weren't invited personally to attend. I guess
That might be a point. And
Okay.
I
there are
just,
some of those that aren't.
yeah.
The only thing
No.
I would want to do before I would make a nomination would be just, I only had 4 criteria that I used and whittling the list down, so to speak. And but
Is there any
I
interest
think
in
my-
sharing the criteria before we?
no, I'd be more than happy to share it, although I think the point that Commissioner Hoppick just maybe may have to may take precedence, but, and we had several criteria that we used, was it 4 years ago now? 5, almost?
Five.
About 5 years ago. But the ones that, for me, that were most important, is experience as a prior city commissioner or a substitute equivalent experience. The candidate has to be able to digest the amount of new information that we're presented weekly, form opinions, and debate the issues in a collegial manner, even when not agreeing with other commissioners. As a commissioner, I feel that we're the interface between the citizens at large and city administration. The ability to listen through the rhetoric and decipher the message trying to be conveyed is of utmost importance. And while it's difficult in a small city to not be touched by any of the institutions, businesses, projects, and ideas that come before the commission on any given day, it's better, I think, from an image perspective, if an appointed interim commissioner entered with as little perceived or real conflicts of interest. And I don't know that that would necessarily apply, but it was just, I looked at the 4 things that I think make it easy to have the public accept whoever we nominate. Those were the most important to me.
Thank you. Commissioner Hoppeck, Commissioner Ryan, I don't know if you want to say anything. Just to share what my evaluation criteria is going to be is, number one, I thought that our overwhelming consensus a couple weeks ago was on experience. And I think that's really important. I think previous commission experience is a plus, but not a disqualifier if it's not there. Frankly, while I didn't extend personally the invitation to all applicants to be here tonight, I would suggest that someone who applied to serve on this commission, who isn't here either in person or virtually, who didn't make the time or didn't make the time to reach out and say, hey, I can't be here, but I want you to know, that I'm still very interested. To me, if the applicant isn't in the audience, that's a disqualifier for me, because this job, it takes a lot of time. And if you don't have the time or the passion to show up at the initial, nomination, that's just, for me, unfortunately, that's just a non-starter. And with that,
Could I just go muddy the water?
you bet.
But when I was being considered for appointment to fill Barb Shirley's term, I actually didn't know that I was allowed to be here for the deliberation,
Okay,
and I was not here for that meeting.
gotcha.
Obviously, I know more now than I knew then, but and I don't know what whoever's not here's take on the attendance perspective was, but that might be an explanation.
Yeah, and one of the things I looked at, and I know there's an individual that does not have city commission experience, but has been in the community an extended period of time and has significant financial background. And when we were looking to replace, Rod was kind of a person that I leaned on a little bit for some of as we're talking about budgets and funding and stuff. So to me, one of the important criteria is somebody that maybe has some ability to crunch some numbers and do some financial stuff. So I think we all have our own reasons we would nominate somebody. So I don't know.
Having said all that, I'm ready to go.
All right.
Do we have do you have an order in place?
Well,
Or
here's what I was thinking. Commissioner Davis, has the roll call every week since we've gone to roll call, because we do it by alphabetical order and we end with me. And I think that as maybe the single reward for having to step out and make that first vote for the last however many months, I just assumed we do it alphabetically unless someone has a better suggestion. And I'm happy to go last as presiding officer, if at all.
Or we could,
Fine with that.
In that case, I nominate Randall Hardy.
All right. I'll open my page here to make sure that I have the correct verbiage. All right, so Randall, we have, of course, I'm not going to be able to find the right page. All right.
Oh, the Robert's.
All right, well, I will say that we have the nomination of Randall Hardy. Next, I will turn to Commissioner Hoppick for his nomination.
Mayor Hodges, I make a motion that we fill the unexpired term of Rod Franz with Douglas K. Alt.
All right, we have the nomination of Douglas Alt and Commissioner Ryan.
I would move we accept the nomination of Aaron Peck.
All right, and we have from Commissioner Ryan, the nomination of Aaron Peck. And I just want to say, I would be happy with any of those three candidates, and I don't have one to add for myself. I am looking at you all, though, to see, I don't know Mr. Alt, and I know Mr. Peck, but I don't see him in the audience. Would you care to allow any of the members that are here to speak, or do you want to proceed directly with a vote?
I would,
It feels like we can make short work of this.
I would proceed with the vote.
Okay. All right. If there are no further nominations for,
Should I move that the nomination cease?
yes, let's see. I'm reading my script, Commissioner Ryan. You got to let me get my finger down to the, I know you're trying to speed this up, but I got to get my finger down to the right line, okay? Okay, so the understanding that there are no further nominations, I'm going to declare that the nominations for city commissioner are closed. Let's see, without objection, nominations are closed, and the voting will take place beginning with Randall Hardy. And we will have a roll call vote for the election of Randall Hardy to the city commission. Am I doing that correctly, Mr. Bankston, or would you prefer to have a show of hands or?
No, I think you're doing very well, Mayor. My only point was kind of circling back to our earlier discussion. I
Right.
don't know that I'm able to ascertain fully whether anybody is on the phone or not. But if you preferred to have a show
Just
of
a vo-
hands
or a voice vote?
or a voice vote,
Okay.
depending on whether we have anybody strictly on the telephone rather than
There are none at this time.
by
Okay.
Zoom, you have latitude in how you conduct the vote, I think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bankston. I appreciate that clarification. All right, concerning the nomination of Randall Hardy for the city commission seat, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, so we have 2 ayes and 2 nays. In the nomination of Douglas Alt, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
All right, we have 2 there. My question to you, Mr. Bankston, we go through all of them. Yeah, never mind. I answered my own question. In the nomination of Aaron Peck for the city commission seat, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
And that passes 3-1. And Mr. Aaron Peck will be our new Salina City Commissioner. And I don't think that he is here, but Aaron, if you're watching, I've known you since you were about 10 years old, and I am really looking forward to having a younger member here on the commission. So Aaron Peck will be our new city commissioner. When is your anticipated swearing in date, Mr. Scragg? Can we do that at the next meeting?
Yeah, when I scheduled my vacation, I didn't contemplate orienting a new commissioner, but we will certainly get that ready for the next meeting. I'll reach out to Mr. Peck in the meantime.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, he has the advantage of having served before. I know it's been a few years, but at any rate, even if staff is not able to complete like an orientation, I'd still like it if he could be sworn in
Sure.
at the next meeting. And
Certainly. And we'll
I don't know if it
distribute
would
the
be
packet to
appropriate.
him and get it prepped for him to be sworn in so he can participate next week.
And I don't know if it's appropriate at that time, but I would like to offer a resolution of gratitude and best wishes for Commissioner France in his recovery, because he and his family have been so gracious throughout this whole really difficult process. And they made it as easy for us as they could. And that takes a lot of grace in a very difficult time.
I would certainly concur under with the pressing matters beyond what concerned us here in our operations. They handled it very well.
All right. Is there any other business to be brought before the commission?
One question for the city attorney. What is the procedure for changing one's vote?
The offhand, I would say well, let me, if I may explore that a little bit, I'm trying to give you what I expect everyone would prefer, and that would be the easiest answer. Were you speaking of your vote on
Mr. Peck.
Mr. Peck's candidacy?
Yeah.
I think unless anyone else objects, I think you could simply note a change in your vote. That is helpful in that it would not affect the ultimate outcome. Had it affected the outcome, I think we would have had to gone through the whole reconsideration process. But under these circumstances, I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I'm very proud to have Mr. Aaron Peck as our next mayor, and because of the unusual intricacies of the voting method. But I would certainly want him to be welcomed with a unanimous show of support for his appointment.
Very well said. All right. I don't have anything else. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
We've got motions and seconds all over here. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.